Isn't it about time for somebody's favorite radio program?
Yeah.
97.3 ESPN presents The Sports Bash with Mike Gill.
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. I can't see him, but he talks to me.
Now, live from inside the Ocean Casino Resort Studio, here's Mike Gill.
We are live on a Thursday edition of the Sports Bash, 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app, streaming live video on the X platform at 973 ESPN. Use the hashtag SB Live. What's up, everybody? I'm your host, Mike Gill. Josh Henning is producing today's show. You out there, Sixers draft last night. Well, they stayed at 16. They end up with Jared McCain out of Duke. Interesting player here. A lot to get into. A lot of thoughts on this. We'll share them with you coming up today on the Sports Bash. By the way, the Sixers draft re-kicks back off at 4 o'clock today. They have pick number 41. And we'll have that live for you, I would imagine, by the time our show ends tonight here on the Sports Bash. Jared McCain. So, he is a guy that many of you may actually know. I mean, he played at Duke, so a lot of people out there, if you're a casual college basketball fan, you've heard of Duke. As opposed to many of the players that were drafted in the top part of the draft. But McCain, we talked a little bit about him yesterday. He was in a lot of mock drafts to the 76ers. And he's a very good shooter. Very good scorer. He's a guy that would be very, very interesting if you didn't have Tyrese Maxey. Now, he is interesting because of the fit with Maxey. Set a Duke freshman record, 8 3-pointers in a game. A game against Florida State, he had 8 threes. He hit for 35 points in that game. If you watched him play in the NCAA tournament, in the game they lost against NC State, 32 points. He is one of these guys that took over games at times for Duke. He averaged 14 points a game. He shot 41% from three. But for a smaller guy, 5 rebounds. He's a tough guy. He is a guy that, for a 6'2" guard, he gets in the mix a little bit there. He likes to mix it up. Now, there's another side of Jared McCain that has been highly discussed over the last 24 hours, and that's his presence on TikTok. He is all over the place. He's got like over 2.5 million followers on TikTok. He has a huge social media presence. Some people have been critical of his social media presence. Is that something? You know, that's just today's athlete. I don't really get all wrapped up into that. The guy's making money because he's on TikTok while he's in college. I don't have a big problem with it. But it has been a huge topic of conversation. Here's what we'll say. They get Jared McCain, very good shooter, tough-minded defensive player too, but is he too small? You know, we talked about this yesterday. You have duplicitous players with McCain. We talked about Dillingham. These are guys that are both very similar to Tyrese Maxey in size. One of the things Jay Billis, ESPN college basketball analyst, brought up, though, when talking about Jared McCain, is the thing you want to hear when you're talking about a player who might be undersized and that he has the traits to make up for his size. Here's what Jay Billis said.
Even though he's small, McCain is just 6'2", and he doesn't have crazy long arms or anything. But McCain gets in there and rebounds. He's tough, he's physical, and he's really strong. But he's just got that trait of being a winner and being a leader.
That's what you want to hear. He has the traits of being a winner and being a leader, coupled with the fact that he's a very good shooter. He's a scorer. He's a guy that at the NBA level, a lot of times when you try to project whether a player is going to be a good shooter from three at the NBA level, you kind of look at their free throw shooting. He's a good free throw shooter, which should translate into him being a good shooter elsewhere. 41% from three, 14 points a game, took over games at time. And as Jay Billis points out, Jared McCain is a winning player.
Jared McCain is a winner, and he's one of the hardest workers you're ever going to see, and he's got an infectious personality and a spirit and an attitude that you just frankly don't see that often. On the court, he's an ultra-competitive killer. An outstanding shooter.
Sounds a lot like a guy you already have on this team who happens to wear the same number that Jared McCain wore at college, number 0. I mean, all of the traits so far sound a lot like Tyrese Maxey. And I think that's why this pick was a little bit head-scratching, not because the player's not good. Jared McCain, if you told me, hey, you ended up with Jared McCain, and I didn't know anything else about your roster, I'd say, man, you got a really good player. Played at Duke, shoots the ball, he's a winner, leader, all of that stuff. But at the same time, you have a player who is a winner, tough guy, shoots the ball, scores, but he's 6'1". I mean, Tyrese Maxey is a very similar size, stature, and player to Jared McCain. So I guess there's two questions that kind of arise from this. One, do they keep these two guys together, right? Is Jared McCain a guy that you say, all right, we like this guy a lot, and he's a big part of what we want to do. We think that we found another diamond in the rough like Tyrese Maxey, who was drafted in the 20s, who's 6'2". I think Maxey was like the 21st pick, if memory serves me correctly. And explosive scorer. Now, remember, coming into the league, Maxey was not a great three-point shooter. He has made himself into a really good three-point shooter. This kid, McCain, comes into the league as a pretty good three-point shooter. Both of these guys are 6'2". I don't see how you could have a starting backcourt of two guys 6'2". Although, do you remember Nick Nurse's team in Toronto? Kyle Lowry, 6 foot tall. Fred VanVleet was his running mate back then. And Fred VanVleet is another guy who is undersized guard. And Nick Nurse played those two guys together, and it resulted in them winning an NBA championship. Now, they had other pieces around them, obviously. Some guy named Kawhi Leonard was pretty good. But the point here is a lot of people look at a guy like Fred VanVleet, and he is a scoring guy who is a tough-minded defender, much like Kyle Lowry, who is not a scoring guy, but a tough-minded kind of guy. So did they just see the traits of Jared McCain and say, this reminds me, because VanVleet, I mean, I think he's 6 foot tall. So you're looking at the Lowry VanVleet backcourt, smaller than the Sixers' potential backcourt here. And listen to what Daryl Morey said, because he was asked about his defense. And Morey said he believes that McCain can become a good NBA defender.
A valid concern, obviously, your backcourt, in a perfect world, you'd have taller. But I think you have to compensate that with strength. He's got like a strong frame, very strong, good rebounder. We think he'll be a solid defender in the league over time. He was being targeted at Duke, and as the season went on, he became someone that was actually one of their better defenders.
So he thinks he could be a better defender or a good NBA defender. Jay Billis says this size is less important because he's a good enough player.
He had games for Duke this last year where he just took over. At Florida State, in the NCAA tournament, scoring over 30. He's an outstanding player. The only downside, if you will, is he's not bigger. You wish he was bigger. If you're good enough, you're big enough. And Jared McCain is good enough.
If you're good enough, you're big enough. And it's pretty interesting when you hear him say that. If you're good enough, you're big enough. And that's essentially what the Toronto Raptors had with Nick Nurse. They had two players in the backcourt who were 6 feet tall, but they were good enough. And Jared McCain said he feels like a Fred VanVleet type of player that Nick Nurse had in Toronto. That kind of resonated with him. And Daryl Morey said that McCain fits into what Nick Nurse wants. So you wonder, did Nick Nurse have input on this pick?
He's got the attitude that Coach Nurse likes to bring, which is just get a little bit better every day. He's got, 95th percentile approach to the game. We've had some good luck with taking the kids with a real base of potential and a strong work ethic, and we were really happy. I think I'm excited for Philadelphia to get to know him.
Well, if Philadelphia wants to get to know him, you can go to his TikTok page with the other 2.8 million people who follow him there and check out his dances and his antics. But seriously, I wouldn't judge him on that. And in fact, Jay Billis, I think, mentioned, like, hey, if this was another player, that I didn't know as well and didn't have the work ethic of this guy, I may question the social media presence that this guy has. And look, you could take Billis and say he's a Duke guy, but one of the things is he has been pretty fair when judging Duke players. We were talking about this beforehand, before the show. And Jared McCain's a guy that it's easy, in a market like Philadelphia that has that blue-collar, tough mentality, and you're seeing these videos of him. He's got a shower cap on, and he's dancing, and he's got the nails painted, and, you're trying to find ways to say, this is the guy that you ended up taking in the first round. And Jay Billis is saying, basically, hey, look, if I didn't know this kid, I might question those things as well. Like, is his mind in the right space? But knowing this guy and seeing him play, those are a separate business for him. And keep in mind, in the world we live in today, there's a lot of money to be made on TikTok videos and social media posts. So while it might be, why are you doing that? This is kind of what we were, down the road we were talking about the other day when we were debating back and forth whether or not you would want your head coach to do a podcast. That's a business. That's a world, right? There are people who are podcasters. I don't want my NBA head coach being a podcaster. Now, you might say, I don't want my 16th overall pick in the draft to be a TikTok guy. But as, Jay Billis kind of laid out, that this guy is all business. He's tough. He's a leader. And quite frankly, he's a pretty damn good shooter. I mean, I do, recall McCain. Now, I talked about him a little bit yesterday. 1 game 30. The game before that, 7. The game before that, 32. He was kind of up and down at times, but that's the nature of being a freshman, I guess. And it's the nature of being a freshman on a team that had a lot of options. I mean, the Duke team had a lot of guys on that team. Filipowski, who, by the way, did not get drafted last night. He could be one of the first picks drafted in today's portion of the draft, but we'll see. There's a lot to get into today. Austin Krell, our Sixers insider from 97.3 ESPN.com, is going to join us at 5 o'clock tonight. And I guess some of the questions are going to be, look, the Sixers made the pick at 16. They seem to like him. Daryl Morey said he can't wait for Sixers fans to get to know him, which would make me feel like they're going to keep him. But should the Sixers keep McCain, or is he a guy that they might try to use and bundle for something else? Because here's the problem. Daryl Morey said last night, right? He made the comment last night that, he anticipates the Sixers are going to be the best team in the East. Okay. What else is he going to say, right? I mean, I get it. If you're the Charlotte Hornets, you're probably not saying that. But you're the 76ers who have been, for all intents and purposes, whether you like what they've done, whether you've been disappointed in them, they have been a team that is constantly discussed as a championship team. You might say they haven't got out of the second round. How do you call them a championship team? They have constantly been in that conversation. Very disappointing. They have been very disappointing. But nationally, the 76ers are looked at as a title contender. Locally, you might scoff and laugh at that. But in the NBA circles, they are looked at as a championship contender. No question about it. So Daryl Morey makes the comment yesterday, last night I guess it was his press conference, and he basically threw out there that, what else is he going to say? We think that we're going to be one of the best teams in the NBA. And this is what he should say, by the way, right? Because the 76ers, it's now or never for them, right? It's now or never with Joel Embiid. While you have Joel Embiid, you have to get something done here. So I guess the question is adding Jared McCain at number 16 going to be enough to do it? Now, he says, obviously, we're planning to be the best team in the East next year. Okay, obviously. Well, right now it doesn't look so obvious to most people, right? Right now it doesn't look so obvious to most people. But can they fill the gap between them and Boston? And now there's a gap between you and New York, most likely. OG Anunoby signs back with the Knicks last night. I think that's a pretty big gut punch for the 76ers, honestly. Because I think the Sixers have had to take a lot of detours along the way here. And I can understand the people who want to say and just laugh and say, who do they think they are? Obviously, we're planning to be the best team in the East next year, he says. Okay. Daryl Morey's got to pull a rabbit out of his hat. Because it doesn't look like you're getting Paul George. It doesn't look like you're trading for Jimmy Butler. I guess the Brandon Ingram thing, there might be a little bit of life left in that one. I've heard some whispers that the Sixers could look into a Jeremy Grant trade. Does that do anything for anybody? I mean, Jeremy Grant's a nice player, but now you're going down the road of, hey, do we just reshuffle the mediocrity? It's like the team that has a bunch of number 3 starters. Do you just say, hey, we're just going to go at you with a bunch of number 3 starters? It's tough to go. Tough to say. 609-403-0973. 609-403-0973. Mike, I really like McCain based on everything you, Billis, and others are saying, shooting, work ethic, etc. But everyone is lauding the Lakers for taking Dalton Knecht with the following pick. Top 10 talent dropped, blah, blah, blah. Thoughts regarding should they have taken him instead? Good question, Phil. It was the basis of our text message chain last night between me and my buddies. How could the Sixers have passed on Dalton Knecht when he was on the board at number 16? And I think it's a very fair question. A lot of people love what the Lakers did. Dalton Knecht, the one thing I guess you could say is he's a little older. He's 23 years old, which, I think if you're the Sixers, that's probably something that would be a beneficial thing to you. Getting a more polished player. Getting a more polished player and having him hopefully be more ready to play right off the bat. I think that Knecht, now the one thing I wonder with him is he a little bit of a tweener? Okay, he's 6'5", and is he a good defensive player? Not really. But at Tennessee, he was a big game player. He filled it up big time. Now, he only played 1 year at Tennessee. He was a smaller college guy. So at 23 years old, he's a little bit of a late blooming kind of guy here. He's a hard guy to get a read on. I think if you just said, hey, based on the 1 year at Tennessee, you're thinking this guy was a no-brainer. I definitely think, Phil, it's fair to ask that question. Was he the guy that you should have taken? And the one thing I was asking is his size now you would say they took a guy who's 6 foot. So the question is this kid, or 6'2", is Jared McCain, is he at 6'2", a more explosive and better scorer than the 6'5" Knecht, who doesn't play very good defense? He's not a wing guy, and you're going to get him matched up in some tough defensive situations. And first team All-American, SEC Player of the Year, But these are things like there's a lot of guys in college that are first-team All-Americans, players of the year, that don't even make it to the NBA. They're just really good college players. I think you looked at Dalton Knecht. He fell to this spot because of his age. He's 23 years old, but you could ask the question, is that more of what the Sixers needed? One of the better scorers in the draft. I just wonder if his size, it being kind of a tweener, was part of the problem here for him.
I keep coming back to is Daryl Morey mentioned in his presser last night, Mike, that, they basically said, we got to get the best player available. We can't worry about positional fit in the roster. So if the Sixers think that Jared McCain is the better overall player than Knecht, then what does that say to you, Mike, if the Sixers view those two that way? That they are saying McCain is a better overall player than Knecht?
Well, listen, you at this point, look, Daryl Morey has drafted pretty well. He took Tyrese Maxey. He also, people forget, drafted Isaiah Joe, who has turned into a really good player. Now, you could be asking the question, why did he get rid of Isaiah Joe? He also drafted Isaiah Joe. He drafted Paul Reed, who has been a serviceable NBA player in the second round. He found Joe in the second round, Reed in the second round. So he has found later round guys. And I have to assume, and I don't think they met with Jared McCain. I don't know that they had a meeting with him or had a face-to-face or anything, that they, just like Jared McCain, obviously, the player more so than Dalton Knecht. They think he fits in better. And I think the Sixer fan might say, well, isn't he a duplicitous player to what you already have, Tyrese Maxey? If you had two Tyrese Maxeys on your team, though, are you mad?
I wouldn't be mad.
I mean, you have two guys, if I said, hey, this guy is going to be a Tyrese Maxey type of player, are you mad about that? Or
no, I feel
do you look and say, how do you play these two guys who are undersized guards together in the backcourt? I think that's a fair question. But let's just say that McCain is a very Maxey-esque type of player. I don't think he's going to be quite as fast and as explosive as Maxey, but he might be a better shooter than Maxey, which is tough to say right now because Maxey has turned into one of the best three-point shooters in the league. He was not entering the league a very good three-point shooter. Jared McCain, coming out of Duke, is a better three-point shooter at that stage of his career than Maxey was at that stage of his career.
Sure, and I think that if your plan in going into the season is not that McCain is going to start this year, but that he's the first guy coming in for Maxey, I think you feel a lot better about the team on the court.
It's an interesting thing. That's a good point you bring up then. So do they look at him as the guy that when Maxey leaves the floor? Now, that's the problem, though. Are you looking at a player at 16 to be a backup player? Aren't you thinking about trying to get a guy to be a player that helps you win games?
Well, is that an old mentality then? Is that way of thinking maybe not today's NBA?
I don't know. Listen, is Dalton Knecht coming in at number 16, getting drafted and stepping right into the starting lineup for this team? I'm not sure.
I don't think so. I think that there are a lot of guys that can get out there who would probably start over him.
Paul from Rehoboth Beach, Delaware says, Mike, it's the same story every offseason. We talk about every year how the Sixers are all in on the top guys. A few summers ago, it was LeBron or Kawhi, and it seems like every summer the Stars fleece the Sixers. When are you going to accept the Philly is not a prime NBA destination? Well, it's funny you say that because I remember saying that years ago. We had a whole show on that where I said the Sixers, Philadelphia is not a destination for free agents. Here's the thing, Paul. Only certain teams in the NBA have cap space. The Sixers are one of them. So here's the problem, Paul. You're saying it's the same story every season. We talk about how they're in all the top guys. There's not really any top guys this year. I mean, Paul George, if that's the best guy that you can lure, are you all that excited? The problem is Morey was handed a terrible situation. He got them out of a terrible situation, but he gets them out of a terrible situation at a time that there's not a lot of ability to improve. he ended up getting all these draft choices back that were given away during the Colangelo, Elton Brand years.
Right.
The problem is, as I see it, the draft was not very good. It was not a good draft. I mean, let's be honest. No. This is not a good draft. And as we talked about yesterday, there's going to be good players in this draft. There's always is. Like, you just got to find them. But there's not guys you're excited about on the surface. There's guys you might be excited about once you see them play. But entering the league, there's not a whole heck of a lot to be excited about, Paul. So I understand what you're saying, but you're acting as if, like, all of these top-level free agents are available and the Sixers can't get them. There's nobody available. That's the problem. There's not a guy that you're like, hey, he's available, you got to go get him. And then that guy says, no, I'm not interested. And Paul George might say, I'm not interested in the Sixers. Now, there's a big reason why. Paul Hudrick explained it yesterday. I thought Paul did a really good job of talking about why the Paul George thing probably won't come to fruition. And I don't know that a lot of people understood the fact that his family lives out west, his mother, all that kind of stuff. So I agree with what Paul's saying. The Sixers I don't think are a prime NBA destination. They never really have been. We did a whole show on that one time. And I said that Philadelphia is not a destination, but what is a destination is money. And when you have cap space and the other teams don't, it gives you another avenue to be more attractive as a city that's probably not an attractive NBA city.
And again, if you can overpay somebody for 1 year to come in, you kind of turn the clock over to next year.
Well,
right?
and that's where the Sixers, and we talked about this yesterday, I think, with Paul, which is you're starting to get down the road where plan A may have been Paul George. Plan B may have been making a trade for a Jimmy Butler or someone of that ilk. And all those are now drying up. So what's plan C or D or E or F? And his thing was maybe you just have to give the balloon payments to a bunch of guys, overpay them while you have your cap space, and then get the cap space again next year. You know, in other words, overpay a guy to come here for 1 year, have a team option for the second year, and then you'll have cap space again next year because you got to use the cap space while you have it. So what does that mean? Oh, well, it's Contavious Caldwell-Pope. It's this guy or that guy. Not all that exciting, by the way. Not all that exciting. Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app, streaming live video on the X platform at 973 ESPN. You can watch the show live. Coming up, our Sixers insider Austin Krell at 5 o'clock tonight. The Sixers should have made their second round pick by then. It's more Sports Bash coming up on 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app, and streaming live video on the X platform at 973 ESPN. Use the hashtag SBLive.
It's this.
When it comes to Zaxby's Fingers, there's a few non-negotiables. It's gotta be only premium tenderloin, marinated for 12 hours and fried to crispy perfection. What is negotiable? The flavors you create mixing our 12 signature sauces. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
With Mike Gill.
Keeping the fans entertained and happy.
On 97.3 ESPN and the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app.
2:34 Sports Bash, 97.3 ESPN. Keith Pompey from the Inquirer is going to join me at 3 o'clock today. We'll get his take on what the Sixers did last night. Sports Bash, 97.3 ESPN. The Sixers got a winner, a leader, and one of the best shooters in the entire draft class. That's what Jay Billis says about Jared McCain. But what does one ESPN analyst think the Sixers, why they'll be a fascinating story to watch over the next few days? Bobby Marks this morning on Unsportsmanlike said Philly is certainly a fascinating story to watch over the next 3 to 4 days, because if Paul George goes back to the Clippers, what is the plan B there? Well, he's got a good point there. The problem is Paul George being the top guy in this draft, in this free agent class, made it a very unappealing year to have the cap space. The problem is you don't get to pick and choose when you have the cap, right? when you have bad contracts like the Sixers did, the Al Horford deal was a debilitating deal. The Tobias Harris deal was a just absolutely crippled them. And the fact of the matter is, you can't just pick and choose. Like, I got some clown emailing, texting us about, why doesn't Morey do this? Why didn't he do that? Why didn't they trade for Porzingis and Drew Holiday? What were the Sixers on their roster last year? I'll hang up and wait. What were they giving up to go get Porzingis and Drew Holiday last year? You can't just say you could have made those deals and then not look at what the Sixers roster looked like. Who were the Milwaukee Bucks or the Dallas Mavericks taking from the 76ers? Who are they taking from those teams? If you call up and say, hey, I'm interested in Drew Holiday, what are the Bucks asking for in return? Okay? If you're going to make a dumb comment, at least say, you could have got Drew Holiday, and here's what, don't say, well, that's what Morey gets paid for. He's paid big money for that. Well, the roster he was given, that's what you're stuck with. It wasn't like Morey built this roster. This was the roster he was given. When he got this job, he was given a team that had horrible contracts from the Colangelo and Brand duo. All right? So here is the roster, Daryl. Figure it out. Well, if you want it to be figured out overnight, then fine. We can agree. He didn't figure it out overnight. Now, you'd have to be a complete idiot to think that he was going to get the Horford deal, the Richardson deal, the Tobias Harris deal all off the books and be able to have enough to trade for Porzingis. So if you want to say, well, Brad Stevens has run circles around Elton Brand, okay, that's a fair one. Now, listen, Morey is without fail here. He has made mistakes. He has done some stupid things, just like everybody else. We all act like if a GM makes a mistake that he's the worst. People make mistakes. They're not perfect. But Daryl Morey was handed I wish I could curse. He was handed an awful situation. I like the guy said draft picks. He just responded, draft picks. Hey, dum-dum. The Sixers had no draft picks, which is why they couldn't make a trade like that. They restocked the draft picks now because of, I'll let you answer it, because if I say it,
it's Daryl Morey.
They had no draft picks last offseason. You know why? Colangelo and Brand traded them all away. They didn't have any draft picks last offseason. So if you just answered me and said, oh my God, they could have traded draft picks for Drew Holiday. Hey, jackass, they didn't have any draft picks. Now they do. Why?
Because Daryl Morey made trades.
They now are and this is why we said before, Morey has done a really good job of getting them back to this point with cap space and draft picks. They did not have that last offseason. They did not have draft picks last offseason. They did not have cap space last offseason. So he has done a good job of getting that all back. Now you could say, hey, Morey, you have draft picks and you have cap space. Now I want to see you do the job you got hired to do. If you want to say, why didn't he do any of this stuff the first 3 years he was here? That answer is easy. All you have to do is be objective. I could be the biggest Daryl Morey hater on planet Earth and say this guy hasn't done anything. He has sucked everywhere he's gone. But at least I have to be objective and say he walked into a terrible situation with this team. He walked into a situation where the team overpaid for a guy like Tobias Harris. Then they went out and signed a guy like Al Horford, and that did not work. Then they went and got a guy like Josh Richardson, and that did not work out. So his first orders of business were, I got to find a way to get out of those deals. I've got to find a way to get out of the Horford deal and out of the Richardson deal because we cannot be competitive with those guys on the roster taking up all that spot. and I have no draft choices. So I have to find a way to get rid of those guys to start clearing the cap space so I can start building my way back to cap space. And I have to find a way to get draft choices back in here so that I can utilize those draft choices in the event that the cap space doesn't allow me to get the star players that I want. Because why? I'm in Philadelphia. It's not a free agent destination. And I might have money in an offseason where there is not a lot of free agent options. So I have to get draft choices back. They did not have any draft on this day last year. On this day last year, the draft day, the Sixers had no draft choices. So you can't sit here and say, you could have traded for Drew Holiday with draft choices.
The draft choices you didn't have.
They didn't have any.
Now, look, I understand the one. If someone wants to spin this, Mike, someone could spin it and say, well, you got draft picks in the James Harden deal, and then maybe if you weren't so hyper-specific in what you wanted for James Harden, you could have, in theory, gotten the picks in the Harden deal sooner and flipped them for somebody. To which, I'm sure we can create any scenario in our mind for some of this stuff. The problem is that when you start running down the road of, if you would have done this, if you would have done that, you're also having to convince all of us, Mike here, you, me, everyone listening on 97.3 ESPN, that the other teams would have cooperated. Because it takes two to tango. I think one of the problems that people forget is maybe there's a
conversation. But to bring that up, though, is their point is Morey's so good, he should be able to find a deal. You're making it like, well, it takes two to tango. The point that people who don't like Morey are saying, if he's so good, he has to figure it out.
Okay, well, he has to figure out something that might not be figure-outable.
That's my point is they're not smart enough to understand that. You're just assuming that all these people, first off, you have to be objective. Again, Morey, to me, has just been whatever for the Sixers. He hasn't been a difference maker. I think what he has been a difference maker is putting them back in position to be able to be in play for free agents and the draft. The last couple seasons, they have not even been in. They couldn't do anything in free agency because of the contracts that Elton Brand signed. So Morey couldn't even be a player in free agency the last couple of years, and yet found a way to make the team competitive. Nobody had any expectations for this team this season. None. There was no buzz, no excitement, and anything. Found a way to make the team somewhat competitive to where they were a playoff team, and some people like them to be a deep playoff team. That did not happen.
Right.
So I think Morey has been here. I'm not sitting here saying the guy's been great. I'm not saying the guy's been an amazing GM, period. What I'm saying is for him to get the team to where they are now, he has done a good job of getting them from when he was here to today. Now I'm saying you did all the things that get them out of the kind of purgatory they were in. Now you need to start working. You have to start utilizing all of the assets that you have created for yourself and turning the leaf over and pushing this team into the next spot. I don't know that he's going to be able to do that, quite frankly. But to suggest that he has failed is complete oversight in understanding the contractual situations that he was given. That's my point.
Right. And at the end of the day, I don't think we can really judge Morey until after this current offseason. Because this is the offseason it's all been building toward, right? Every move you've made has led up to you made certain moves with the idea that you're going to have assets this offseason. Now what do? Now we can fully judge you. If every move, aside from the Harden-Simmons trade, was to get to the point where you are in position to make moves, then really you can't judge him too much until at the start of training camp, basically, this fall.
Yeah, and listen, that whole thing was another whole thing that Morey had to deal with that he did not sign up for. No. The Simmons thing.
Right.
That gets ignited by the fact that Doc Rivers says, I don't know if he can be the point guard. and Embiid makes the comment, and then Simmons decides, well, I don't want to be here anymore.
Right.
So he has to figure out how to get out. Listen, I go back down the road of Morey all you want. He was given a horrible situation, and he has got it back to a desirable situation. The last 3 years have been an undesirable situation. No draft choices, no cap space.
Right.
Now you have plenty of cap space and multiple draft choices that he re-brought back into the coffers. You want to judge him from this point on? Be my guest.
And that's what I'm saying. I'm saying you judge him starting this offseason.
Be my guest. If you say at the end of this offseason when they enter training camp, and if you look at this team and say, hey, listen, he added all the creative ability to get to this point. You traded out guys, you brought draft picks back, you had the cap space, and you want to say at the end of free agency hasn't even started yet. It doesn't start till Sunday, and people are being critical of what have they done with all these draft choices? What have they done with some of the draft choices aren't in this draft. They're for future drafts that they didn't have.
Right.
They didn't have picks in future drafts. They now do. But if you want to say, 2 weeks from now, once free agency opens and if you're still stagnant and say, well, you had cap space and you had draft choices, what have you done? I have no problem with that. I have no problem with that at all. But if you can't be objective enough to say, listen, he walked into a pretty terrible – look, Elton Brand was not qualified to be the general manager of an NBA team.
He was ill-prepared for what he walked into.
He walked in and quite frankly was pandering to the fans to some extent. They're yelling, hey, Elton, make a trade. So what does he do? I got you. He goes out and trades for Tobias Harris. And then not only does he trade for Tobias Harris, he signs him to a 5-year max extension. I mean, you had a guy who just wasn't ready for that job, and he basically, the Sixers had to replace him. I mean, they go and get Daryl Morey and said, listen, you got to help us out here. We got terrible contracts. What can we do? So I have no problem with what Brand did. I'm not excited by what he did. I don't think now listen, he did draft Maxey. And I think he did a good job in the Harden trade based on the circumstances. He didn't just give in to Harden. He got a good deal for Harden. He got a ton of draft capital back, and all the players that he got back in return were all expiring contracts.
Which was a huge part of the plan, because part of the plan was in order to get out of salary cap hell, you got to build a bridge out.
Right. He acknowledged that, hey, we got a problem here. I was part of the problem. I brought this guy here, and I'm going to get out of it. I'm going to get this problem out of here. But I'm not going to do it unless I get something I like. He held his ground and got something he liked. I don't have a problem with the return they got for James Harden. So Morey has made plenty of mistakes, like everybody else in life. He has made mistakes. He has created mistakes, much like Howie Roseman has done. Roseman has made mistakes, created problems, but he's fixed a lot of those problems. 609-403-0973, 609-403-0973. That's the text board. You can chime in. Watch the show live on the X platform. Use the hashtag SBLive. Follow us on X at 973ESPN. Keith Pompey talks Sixers in 12 minutes. Stick around.
The Sports Bash with Mike Gill on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
253 Sports Bash. I'm Mike Gill. Hey, I got a deal for you. Bring any written estimate for a new 2024 Acura from another Acura dealer over to my guy Rocco at Key Acura of Atlantic City, and he'll beat that price by $500 and give you an additional $500 on your trade. And now through the end of the month, June 30th, you got 3 days for this deal. It's a 36-month lease on a 2024 Integra for just $299 a month, with $49.95 down, no tax, tags, fees, nothing else, just like that. $49.95, your payment's $299 a month. Swing that, baby. Key Acura, Tilton Road, EHT, your small but friendly dealer. See dealer for details. I'm Mike Gill. This is the Sports Bash, 609-403-0973, 609-403-0973. Jared McCain out of Duke is the newest 76er. I like the player. Not sure I like the fit, but I'm willing to see what happens here because guess what? free agency hasn't started yet. The draft has the second round tonight. There could be a whole lot of changes by the time Austin Krell joins us tonight at 5 o'clock. A couple whispers that we've been following out there. Contavious Caldwell-Pope, maybe Jeremy Grant. Remember Jeremy Grant? He's now over 30 years old. He's 30 years old, Jeremy Grant, but 40% from three, shoots 5 threes a game. Not all that exciting of an addition, possibly. We'll see. Very tough offseason to kind of navigate. Not a lot of talent out there. So guess what, Daryl Morey? Feet to the fire here, man. Feet are to the fire. I think it's fair to say, hey, you did a good job getting to this point, but now we need to see the fruits of the labor. Does Keith Pompey agree? He joins me next.
This is the Sports Bash with Mike Gill on 97.3 ESPN and the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app. Now live from inside the Ocean Casino Resort Studio, here's Mike Gill.
3 o'clock, Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. This hour of the show brought to you by Broadlee's Plumbing, Heating, and Air Conditioning. Broadlee's your trusted source for heating, plumbing, service, and installation for generations. 609-390-3907. Online, Broadlees.net. I'm Mike Gill. What's up, everybody? Sixers, they'll draft 41 today, potentially, maybe not. No action last night. Kind of quiet on the draft front on the moves last night. Thought there'd be more action. Keith Pompey from the Philadelphia Inquirer covers the 76ers. Well, Keith, they drafted Jared McCain, a 6'2" guard out of Duke, very good shooter. You asked the question last night about, his size and everything, and Daryl Morey kind of, he's a smaller guy, very duplicitous to what they have there. Were you surprised that McCain was the guy they went with?
Excuse me, I'm sorry about that. Yes and no. The no part is because he's a guy that they liked for a while. He provides the shooting. He does a lot of things. So he was linked to them for a while. The yes part was because there were other people who fell to him. There were guys who were drafted behind him who, were projected to be lottery picks. There was, so I felt as if that when you talk about taking the best person available, someone who is NBA ready, there were some other guys that I felt as if that, hey, they're going to be there and the Sixers are going to pivot and they're going to go after these guys. So that's the one thing that surprised me. But from the most part, he was a guy whose name kept coming up, even though they didn't work him out. But he was a guy that someone must have leaked something to, so his name kept coming up, to people.
Yeah, I mean, what do you make of, how do they view him with that size? Is he a guy that plays next to Maxey? Is he a guy that, replaces Maxey, comes off the bench? I mean, do they view him as a guy who steps in right off they don't have a lot of guys on this roster, as we know. So do they view him as a day one starter?
No, they don't. They don't see him as a day one starter. They see him as a guy who's going to play minutes with Maxey, but they're going to be limited minutes with Maxey. But what they do see him as a guy who, he can play with Embiid, in certain lineups, a guy who can knock down shots and help stretch the floor for him. They're extremely excited about him. They feel like over time he and Maxey can play more minutes together. But at this particular time, they realize that, from day one, it could be like a little bit of a nightmare situation going up against bigger guards. But the one thing that they did point out was that when he was initially at Duke, because of his size, he was attacked. But as the season went along, he became a better defender, and they're hoping that the same thing can happen, during his tenure with the Sixers.
So far, they have a lot of cap space. They had this 16th pick, but they've been quiet. It seems that every door that was open has been kind of slammed in their face, Keith. The Paul George stuff, the Jimmy Butler stuff, almost everything that they had been tied to seemingly is drying up. As we enter the draft today, round 2, where do they kind of sit in your mind with their cap space and their ability to make moves?
I think they're still pretty good with the cap space. I mean, you have Jared McCain. Like, you can make up at least $65 million, right? I mean, that's what they could have in cap space. Well, right then and there, he just took $4 million off of that. So they still have 61. I think the main thing is we really won't know what's going to happen until Paul George makes his decision. From that point, I think that we'll have a better idea. But, the thing that I think is right now, I think a guy like, and this would probably have to be through a trade, but Brandon Ingram will probably be there for them, like depending on if somebody else can offer more. But again, when you look at Brandon Ingram, he could be a good addition. But if we're going to be honest, he's probably, of all the guys they want, he's the fourth or fifth option. So, like you said, a lot of different things have dried up for him. So it's kind of not like the ideal situation they want, and they'll try to make do. But to me, he looks like the most likely one because, like you said, no Jimmy. You won't get LeBron. It doesn't look like Paul George is coming, right? So you don't want Zach LaVine. You say you don't want Zach LaVine. You say DeMar DeRozan isn't a good fit. So it looks like the guy, if you can get him, would be Brandon Ingram.
Yeah, and just to see, I mean, we haven't even started free agency yet, but the Knicks have already made one massive trade and then already re-signed a guy that the Sixers may have had interest in. Morey obviously said, hey, we want to be the best team in the East, but when you look at them right now, how far away, and is there enough cap space and moves to be made to make up the ground of how far they are right now?
I mean, you never know. Like, they can do a surprise thing, but right now it just doesn't look optimistic. Again, he said that, but you see other teams making moves. I mean, you see other teams, trying to, no, they are trying, but you see other teams make it. And when I look at the Knicks team, I feel like the Knicks catapulted the 76ers and the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, you never know what Milwaukee can do if they get healthy because they do have Dame and they do have, Giannis. So let's see how that goes. But right now, I mean, you're looking at the 76ers and you have to say, right now they're the fourth best team in the East, if that. Because, because you don't know what teams like Cleveland are going to do. They had a great coach.
We lost Keith for a second there. It looks like he froze up on us here on the Sports Bash Live 97.3 ESPN. We'll try to re-enter him back into the stream in just a second here. But, he talked about them being possibly the fourth team in the East. And I kind of interject with, if that, right? I'm not sure that they're even at that spot right now. And that's kind of discouraging. Obviously, I think last year with Joel being injured, it slipped them down. They probably would have been a top 4 seed last year. But what does that make them and how much different? Oh, there's Keith. We got him back in there. Yeah, you froze up for a second there on us.
Yeah, I'm like just to talk, and I apologize about that.
That's all right. Yeah, you were mentioning you said the fourth team, and we both at the same time said if that.
Yeah, if that. I mean, because you don't know what Cleveland's going to do, right? It's a lot of issues with the 76ers, a lot of things that they have to address. But, the thing is, the problem is, I think that stop saying that, we're number one. We feel like it. Because I feel like when you say stuff like that, maybe some in the fan base are like, come on, man. Make a move, make a move. So I just feel like they're putting unnecessary pressure on themselves.
Well,
but again, they got to make a move.
Yeah, they don't have anybody on the roster to make a move with. That's one of the, I want to get your thoughts on when Morey got hired and to where they are now. People were excited when they got Morey. He was, he did a great job in Houston. He got them to some finals. Some people overvalue him maybe. Some people think, hey, he's overvalued. Why do you guys, has he done a good job? Was there a lot of obstacles? What do you think his role is in how they got to where they are now?
Here's the thing. When Morey came in here, they were I think what Morey did is kind of crazy. They were on a certain level and then they dropped. And he he made some moves to get them back on the level that they were on before that 2020 season, when they lost in the bubble, the first round, right? Mm-hmm. They're on that level that they were before, like where they're a second round team, where they were, and then they lost this year. So the thing about it is, yes, he had that magic initially, but he just hasn't been able to do the things that thus far that he was built to do. Mm-hmm. Now, again, he worked magic, freeing up cap space, doing some other things. But right now, and then you got to give him credit. The stuff that he got on that James Harden trade, getting them, those guys, he got the assets that he needed. But now it's a matter of what are you going to do with those assets? Right. And is this team going to be able to get out of the second round?
Yeah, see, that's the thing. I like when they got him, I think he was kind of handed like you had the Horford thing, the Richardson thing, and then the Simmons thing gets thrown into your lap. So I think he has done a good job of getting them to this point. But now it's like, hey, you got cap space. You restocked your assets. Now you're getting judged, right? I mean, is that kind of where we're at here, or does the organization not see it that way?
No, I mean, they have to see it that way. I mean, it's reality. They may say they don't see it that way or not, but it's reality. I mean, all you have to do is go on social media, and especially go on there last night and seeing how people were disappointed. Not necessarily with the pick. I mean, there's some people who like it, there's some people who don't. But the disappointment it's like, wow, look at what the Knicks are doing. Oh, you mean the Houston Rockets are trying to get KD? Well, last year, look at Boston made these moves, Milwaukee. So, I think you have to see it. And I get it. You don't have a lot of assets. You don't have a lot of other things to give up. But at the same time, it's kind of like they're making moves while the fans view it as if either you can't make a move or you're being patient. Mm-hmm. And I think, how it is, like we're from the Philly area, like we're impatient people. And I think that's what's going on. So, yeah, you have to see it, and you have to see it.
Yeah, I mean, and you just mentioned, Boston made 2 trades last year getting Drew Holiday and Porzingis. And people say, well, how come, he didn't have the foresight? And at some point you have to say, well, what did the Sixers really have to make the moves to get players of that ilk? That was one of the issues is they don't really have a lot right now that were movable parts, especially last year. I mean, you had a team last year that was crippled by that Harris contract for the last 5 years with a bunch of, well, before the Harden thing, you didn't know what was happening there. So last year was almost like, hey, we'll just take a shot with this team 1 year and now try to start over. So now they're at the starting over point because they have nobody on the roster, and yet it doesn't seem that there's anybody out there to bring in. So how do you fill this roster?
Yeah, that's going to be tough. I mean, I think that, when we talked about it before, I think there are 3 guys that you would like to come back, right? You want to see if they can come back. And we're talking about Nico Batum. You're talking about not Buddy Hield, Kelly Oubre, and maybe Kyle Lowry, maybe, depending on what you can get. But I think like a guy, Caldwell Pope, mm-hmm. right? You have to go after him, Kentavious Caldwell Pope. Like, try to see what you can get for him. But again, I think a lot of this is going to happen once they realize what happens with Paul George. Not just for the Sixers because of him, but I think there's going to become a domino effect, right? There are going to be certain guys who are free agents saying, this is where I want to go. But the problem with the Sixers in regards to rebuilding this season, there's not a lot out there. Like, this is a weak free agent class.
Yeah.
I mean, the number 1 free agent out there is Tyrese Maxey. The number 2 free agent out there is Paul George. Number 3 is LeBron James. Number 4 is James Harden, a guy that you already lost. You know what I mean? Do you want to bring him back? And then number 7 in this whole class is Tobias Harris, a guy that you don't want. So, you know what I mean? Or, I shouldn't say they don't want him, but you know how it ended, right? You never know what can happen tomorrow if they don't get anyone. But at the same time, it's a tough one where where teams like New York, what they did is they were able to acquire OG's bird rights. And then they were able to give him that max salary that no one else could. The same thing with Pascal Siakam. So right now, what you're doing is these guys they are free agents now, but the teams can give them more money than everyone else, where you have to compete against that. So, and you have a lot of cap space, but oftentimes what they do is they'll use your cap space to get what they want from the team that just traded for them, because it would look bad on that team to not pay them because they gave up so many assets to get them. So with that being said, it's a tough time for the Sixers, and they are going big star hunting. But the problem is Jimmy Butler says he's not leaving. He doesn't want to be traded. Paul George can go wherever he wants, and then some other guys have options. So that's the dilemma and the problem that the Sixers are facing right now. So it's hard to say, okay, they're going to do this and they're going to do that with the roster, right? But, they just have to sit back and wait, man. They do. They have to sit back and wait.
Did they, in your mind, try to do something with 16 yesterday and just couldn't find anything and ended up just having to take a player?
Well, they were trying to do something. There was a couple of teams. There was a point where, they had a couple opportunities to trade out of the draft and get a player, and other opportunities to move back. But what happened is they were in love with this McCann guy, and it got to a point where they're saying that, as they saw how things were playing out and how he was coming to them, they just felt like, he was too good to pass up at number 16. So, they could have had something. But then there are some people from you talk to some people around the league and they say, well, look, you can get something with the 16th pick, but it may not have been as impactful as you thought you can get. And the only reason why, there's other teams who had better draft picks who had cap space or something like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, that's what you're competing against. And so, but I feel like, according to Daryl Morey yesterday, they did have some opportunities and some options, but they felt like this young guy was better than the things that they had out there.
Well, round 2 at 4:00 today. They have picked 41, so I guess they have the ability to spin something, and then free agency starts Sunday, and I guess that's when the first dominoes will start to fall. Sunday, some point, we should have a better, clearer idea of what this offseason could look like.
Yeah, we definitely will. I mean, we'll actually have a better idea of what this offseason could look like. I think the dominoes are going to fall on the 29th. When Paul George either opts in or out, right? But then that's the time when LeBron James, we already probably have a great idea what LeBron James is going to do, right? But on the 30th, we'll have a good idea. Now, I think that this free agency, though, will probably be one of those things where a lot of the big name guys aren't going to sign initially just because they're waiting to see what other people do. You know what I mean? Like what frees up. And this year, it is Paul George. For the Sixers, I think Maxey, of course, we all know that he's going to take his offer, but I think that he'll be the last one to sign just because of, cap space, unless it's someone with a minimum salary or whatnot. But I think that, he's going to be a guy, they're going to go after other people, they're going to sign people, and then all of a sudden, Maxey will be the last big deal that they sign, just because they have his bird rights and they want to get other people in.
It almost feels, Keith, they're going down a similar road that they had last year. Guys on 1-year deals and hope to just recoup the cap space and try again next year. That feels like where this might end up.
It does, but you know what? This has to be the year to do it, because the thing is, right now you look at Maxey, his cap hold is $13 million. He's going to make close to 40 something, right? He's going to make a lot of money, right? I think it's like 43 or whatever it is, or 41, whatever. I mean, I don't have the numbers on me, but let's just say
more money than you and I are making. I can tell you that much.
Yeah, more money, way more money. Like, hey, Tyrese, you want to trade lives? But anyway, so the deal is, like right now, this is the time that you're able to have that space allotted, and you can get these guys and then sign them later. Once he gets signed, it's kind of like you're going to be in that Al Horford situation where you're going to have to like cut people, trade people, do whatever you can to create more space. And I get where people are saying, but look, Keith, there's going to be more money available because the TV revenue deals are going to go up. Yeah, but when they go up, the maximum salary you can offer someone is also going to go up. So I feel like, unlike last year, where they had a lot of people coming off the books, right? If you have two guys with a max salary, you may be, not screwed, but you may mess yourself up, because, Tobias Harris is off the books. Like if they would have been messed up, if Tobias was making max, Maxey was making a max, and Joel. So Tobias is off the books. Maxey is basically taking Tobias's spot. So I feel like, and they got rid of James Harden's money, which freed them up to do certain things. So I just feel like the time is now for them to go out and get a third star. If not, I feel like they may miss out next year.
And then, of course, you're running out of years on Joel Embiid's tires, too.
Bingo.
Keith Pompey from the Philadelphia Inquirer, the draft in about 40 minutes. Round 2 begins a 4:00 start, and we'll keep our eyes on that throughout the show. Keith, it's good to catch up with you, buddy. Go Mountaineers.
Yeah, I knew you was going to say that. You lucky I have my pit stuff on.
Caught you on a good day.
Yeah, bad day.
I'll see you, man.
All right, peace.
Keith Pompey from the Philadelphia Inquirer covers the 76ers here on the Sports Bash Live 97.3 ESPN. By the way, some news with the Phillies. Spencer Turnbull has been placed on the 15-day IL with a right lat strain to fill his spot on the 26-man roster. The Phillies have recalled Junior Marte. He's a guy, Junior Marte. We talked about him the other day. Just talked about the fact that he could be ready to come up. Well, who knew that they're going to need him so soon? He is up now. By the way, tonight, your pitching probables, Trevor Rogers, 1-8 for the Marlins with a 4.90 ERA. He'll face Zach Wheeler and the Phillies lineup. That is out as well. And your Phillies lineup is brought to you by Clark's Moving and Storage, located in Rio Grande. Moving's a breeze with Clark's Moving and Storage. Tonight for the Phils, let's get the lineup for you. It's Schwarber, Turner, Harper. By the way, Turner's your DH tonight. Schwarber is playing left field. Harper, Bohm, Castellanos, Sosa at short, Merrifield at second base, Pache, and Marchand is behind the plate. So there you go. You've got Sosa playing short, Merrifield. That means no Marsh, no Stott. You got Schwarber in left field, and Turner is the DH. That's your Phillies lineup tonight, brought to you by Clark's Moving and Storage in Rio Grande. So there you go. A little, there's a way to get Merrifield and Sosa in the lineup. You put Schwarber into the defensive spot now. He hasn't played a whole heck of a lot of outfield this year. I think this is, if memory serves, and I don't know if I'm right about this, but I think this is only the second game that he has played left field. I think his first one was last week. 609-403-0973. Cole from LBI says, Mike, the Sixers are in a very tough situation with Embiid. You have a 30-year-old 7-footer with a bad knee. How many more years of high-level ball do you expect? I don't see many good moves to make a run for next year. And then you're looking at 2025-26 with a 32-year-old Embiid. Yeah, listen, as Keith Pompey just pointed out, the sand is going through the hourglass on this team. There's no question. And that is why you have to hope that Morey is uberly aggressive and has something up his sleeve that we're not thinking of right now.
This will be Kyle Schwarber's third start in left field. You were one off.
Well, one was just last week.
Yes.
Played left field, and he's playing left field today.
Yep. So before tonight, he had 2 starts in the outfield. Tonight will be number 3.
Well, poor Zach Wheeler.
Better get those ground balls going, buddy.
Sosa at short, Merrifield at second. No Stott tonight and no Marsh. So the lefties.
Trevor Rogers for the Marlins.
Yeah, lefty pitcher. Not a good lefty pitcher, though.
No, he's got almost a 6 ERA. think it's like
Spencer
5.8.
Turnbull, by the way, on the injured list, and this is what we were talking about before, why the Phillies didn't want to use him in the everyday, in the starting rotation. A lot of wear and, hasn't had that many innings in his career. He's already over, I think, 54 innings this year. I think it's more than he pitched all of last year.
Do you buy into his theory that he always gets injured in Detroit?
No.
That's what he said after the game last night, did Turnbull.
I don't think that's a valid excuse. Sports Bash, 97.3 ESPN. The NBA draft continues in about a half an hour from now. Coming up at 4, Andrew DeCecco has football at 4, Knicks Nuggets at 4:30, and Austin Krell, our Sixers insider from 97.3 ESPN.com, joins us at 5 o'clock. We'll probably have the Sixers pick. Keep it locked. More Sports Bash live on 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app, and streaming live on the X platform at 973 ESPN. Use the hashtag SBLive.
When it comes to Zaxby's Fingers, there's a few non-negotiables. It's gotta be only premium tenderloin, marinated for 12 hours and fried to crispy perfection. What is negotiable? The flavors you create mixing our 12 signature sauces. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
Mike Gill.
And I am the voice of the voiceless.
On 97.3 ESPN and the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app.
3:32 Sports Bash, 97.3 ESPN. What's up? This hour brought to you by Broadlee's Plumbing, Heating, and Air Conditioning. I'm Mike Gill. Follow us at Mike Gill Show, at 973 ESPN. Watch the show live. Use the hashtag SBLive. Couple news and notes. Phillies news. Spencer Turnbull placed on the injured list. 15-day right lat strain. So he's out for at least 2 weeks. And Trevor Rogers against Zach Wheeler tonight, your pitching matchup for the Phils as they return. 4-game set against the Marlins of Miami at Citizens Bank Park. Sixers draft today in the second round. We'll see if anything ends up happening here. There's been a lot of conversation. Free agency does not start in the NBA. People are acting as if the Sixers offseason has been a failure so far. It hasn't really started yet. Night one of the draft isn't the end of the offseason. It is the start of the offseason. But really, the free agent portion of the draft has not got the free agent portion of the offseason has not gotten underway yet. I do understand the frustration in terms of trying to find players that you're excited about. I don't know where you're going to get those guys. I honestly don't. I'd like to sit here and say, hey, I'm excited about this offseason and I'm more intrigued. I can't say that I'm excited. So what's the best modus operandi right now for Daryl Morey? He's got to have to be a heck of a lot more creative than I am right now. Now, I don't know all the contractual situations around the NBA, but I find like he's in a tough spot. As Keith Pompey laid out, not a whole heck of a lot of options right now. If Paul George, and we talked about it with Paul Hudrick yesterday, he could end up going to the Warriors. He could end up going back to the Clippers. I think the Sixers are a long shot option for Paul George. And quite frankly, I don't know that people are excited about Paul George. If they got Paul George, and I said at 4:30 today, the Sixers, made a move and they got Paul George somehow. Are you able to, are you all that excited about that? Probably not. You might be. I was looking at this. Keith Pompey, who just joined us, had a poll question up on his Twitter feed. And it asked the question, which free agent would you be most excited about? Not free agent. Which player would you like to see in a Sixers uniform next season? All right, Josh, these were the options. Did you see his poll question that he posted on his Twitter page, or his X page?
I did not. Give it to me.
All right. Who would you like to see in a Sixers uniform next season? Paul George, Jimmy Butler, Brandon Ingram, OG Anunoby.
Okay.
Those were the four options. Final results. The winner had 35% of the vote. Second place was 23.9. Third place was 23.1. And last place was 17.6. Do you want to rank the four guys in how you think the almost 4,000 people voted. 3,966 people voted. Who would you like to see in a Sixer uniform next season? Paul George, Jimmy Butler, Brandon Ingram, OG Anunoby.
I'm assuming Butler was number one.
Okay.
Just because
so you're ranking them on how you think the fans went.
Yeah, I'm assuming the fans would have gone him number one. Now, my choice, if I had any choice I could, I prefer OG Anunoby personally. But I feel like a lot of fans still have a lot of emotional connection with the whole Jimmy Butler feels.
So you think the fans went Butler, then who?
I think that there's a contingent of fans who would like Ingram over Paul George. So the fans would go Butler, Ingram, George, OG. That's what I think my guess of what the fans would do, just because I think there are people who look at Ingram and say he's younger than Paul George. People look at Paul George saying he's a bona fide all-star, and OG Anunoby isn't. And I think there's a lot of people out there who I don't think people value what OG brings to the table, Mike, in general.
Okay. So who would you like to see in a Sixers uniform next season? This was Keith Pompey, who was just on the show at the start of the hour. Number one at 35%. Actually, number 4 at 17%. Brandon Ingram.
So less than I thought. I'm actually proud of those Sixer fans for that.
He is the guy they least would like to see in a Sixers uniform.
I feel better about this poll now because to me, Brandon Ingram really, he doesn't have the resume. He's basically just a guy.
I don't know if that's fair, but I don't know that he's just a guy. I like Ingram a lot. I think he's a very good player. I think he's I think he belongs 4th. But he's been very good. He's a very good player.
He's a very good player, but
he's not just a guy. He's very good.
I think he is a guy who is much less of a resume than the other three.
Yeah. That's not what you said before. You said he's just a guy.
He is just a guy. He's a good player.
Yeah, a good
he's
player.
He's nothing exceptional.
I think he is a very good player, and I think he would be a very good third player. I think he was drafted number 2 overall, or
behind Ben Simmons.
Right? Was he 2 or 3?
2. It was Jaylen Brown who was 3.
Okay, I didn't know if he was in that the Lonzo Ball.
No,
because Ball went to the Lakers.
Ball went to the Lakers. Yeah.
So Ingram was the number 2 player. He's not. When you draft the guy number 2, you're thinking he's he's your face of the franchise.
Sure,
he's not that player.
No, he's not.
And in New Orleans, he's kind of like the number 2 guy there.
So you're saying that you look at Ingram as a guy who he would be a much better player if he was in the 3 role with the Sixers than his current role in New Orleans?
I think he's like a 2-3 in New Orleans, but I don't like the fits around him.
Okay.
Like, they don't really have a center that is like an offensive weapon.
Right.
I think he would be much more free with Embiid around him. And Maxey, as a guy who can get to the basket, they have C.J. McCollum, who's a smaller, undersized guard who's not as good as Maxey. But,
right.
And then Zion is
he's Zion.
Yeah, he's a hard guy to play around.
He's a very odd player to match.
So I wouldn't hate Brandon Ingram. I just, the point I have with Brandon Ingram is I think he's a very good player, but I don't think Brandon Ingram is like, if you got Brandon Ingram, your team went from where it was to the next level.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah. But I still think he's a very good player. He was a great shooter. He is, for whatever reason, his volume of shooting has gone down. I don't know why. Is that because Zion handles dribbles out the ball so much? I just feel like he's not a great fit on the team he's currently on.
Right.
So he was the 4th choice.
Okay.
Keith Pompey at Pompey on Sixers. Who would you like to see in a Sixers uniform next season? Ingram was the last choice. Paul George was next. 23.1.
Yeah, I think that there is a group of Sixer fans who look at Paul George and say, I see his resume, they don't see his age. And the rest of us see his age.
Yeah, Paul George is interesting. He's 34 years old, so he's at the back end of his career. People forget he had that gruesome leg injury.
Yep.
Now he's kind of come back from that, but you wonder, like, how much that took off of him in terms of what he would have been in those years, those prime years that he missed one full year with that injury, right?
Correct. He missed a full year. He's had some other injuries since then that have been less devastating, obviously, but he has been banged up at times. He has had problems playing entire seasons, and then there's the whole, does he show up in the postseason question?
All right. Number 2 on the list of who you would like to see in a Sixers uniform next season, 23.9, Jimmy Butler.
Wow. So there's that many Sixer fans who put aside their Jimmy Butler love to vote for somebody else. That's impressive.
They voted for OG Anunoby. 35% of the people said they would like to see OG Anunoby in a Sixers uniform next season over Jimmy Butler, Paul George, and Brandon Ingram.
I think those are some pretty smart Sixer fans right there.
People have spoken.
That's a very intelligent decision by those fans.
There's only one of those guys who's not available anymore.
Right. That's the problem.
OG Anunoby.
OG Anunoby.
Yeah. So,
which felt like a bit of a slap in the face when that news came out that he was re-signed with the Knicks.
I got to tell you, I was in my car last night when that happened, and when that happened, I was like, oof.
I mean, it's like he got to the corner trying to get away from the car dealership, and the guy ran out with a new offer sheet, and he put the car in reverse and went back to the dealership to sign up. It's like, you almost got him off the lot. He almost drove away, and they roped him right back in.
Yeah, that was a gut punch a little bit, because I thought OG would have been a guy that, all right, they went and got Bridges, let us go get OG.
Right.
And that kind of gives us a player that can be that perimeter defender for Tatum or that perimeter defender for Bridges.
Right.
To that ilk. And now, tough spot there. Now, I'm interested to see what happens with Hartenstein. He would be, to me, for the Knicks, I think is a key guy to retain.
By the way, you know who drafted Isaiah Hartenstein?
No.
Daryl Morey.
He was there in Houston?
So I pulled up the Houston Rockets draft picks during the Daryl Morey era. Isaiah Hartenstein was a second-round pick in the 2017 NBA draft by the Houston Rockets.
Morey's done a really good job of finding the second-round guy. Houston did a really good job at those players. He did a good job here with Maxey. I know he's not a second-round guy, but 21. Isaiah Joe, Paul Reed. These are all guys who have been contributing NBA players.
So do you think there might be any little positive feels, or is Hartenstein just going to go to OKC and get the biggest money he can get?
Well, I don't think the Sixers are going to make that offer. I mean, you're not going to pay that a guy $40 million to back up Joel Embiid.
No. I'm just saying I don't know what Hartenstein's interesting. Yeah.
By the way, the Phillies have placed Turnbull on the 15-day DL. Rob Thompson says he could be out 6 weeks. Michael Mercado will start in his place.
Against the Chicago Cubs coming up.
Well, I'm assuming for the foreseeable future.
No, I'm saying that was the next spot in Turnbull's. If you go through,
yeah, well, I'm saying he will start in his, maybe not long term, because I guess Walker might be back at some point.
Right, I think it's next weekend he's eligible.
Walker's able to come back on the 7th. Yeah, Michael Mercado may be in line to start if Walker isn't back. So Mercado will start, I guess, the next time they need a 5th starter.
Right.
And then after that, Walker will probably be back. The Phillies do not need a 5th starter until like the 6th, I think, is the next time they need one.
So the next one they need is, let me pull it up. I thought it was July 2nd against the Cubs.
All right. That's kind of I just saw that come across.
July 2nd against the Cubs would have been Turnbull's next start. And then after that would have been
Yeah, but they
July
could skip
7th.
that start.
They could, because yes, they do have the Monday off.
Mm-hmm.
But as of, at least on the latest list of projected starters, that was Turnbull's spot.
Yeah, that was his spot. But they could conceivably skip that spot and because they have an off day there.
Correct.
And then the next time they would need him is the 7th.
Well, if they skip him, it would be the 6th. Because everybody would be moved up a day.
Yeah, that's against Atlanta, by the way, on the 7th. They have an interesting.
Atlanta.
They have Chicago on the road, Atlanta on the road, then the Dodgers
at home.
At home. So they have a tough, little road, little schedule coming up here.
That's correct.
Yeah. 609-403-0973, 609-403-0973. A lot of people listening on the free mobile app powered by First Bank of Sea Isle City that are been chiming in on the mobile app all day. Let's see. What do we got here? This is from Richie in Little Egg Harbor listening on the app. He says the free agent market in the NBA is horrible. Yeah, it's not a good free agent class, Richie. Is it Richie? No, I don't know what it is. It's RIC something or another. But it's not a good free agent class. That's part of the problem here is that the Sixers have cap space in a year with not a good free agent crop.
And that's the conundrum. The problem is that you have all of this cap space now. Who do you spend it on? It's not a good...
I think what Paul said yesterday, which is you have a bunch of guys that you overpay and get back out of their contracts again next year. Not exciting.
No, it's not. But, I mean, what else are you going to do?
Hey, guess what? I'm not getting paid that kind of money. I can't figure it out. Daryl Morey, you're on the clock. Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. One of the names that I've been hearing is Jeremy Grant. You have any interest there?
I do have some interest because I think that he's the kind of athletic player they're missing. They don't have a real athlete on the perimeter right now.
21 points a game last year. Portland.
He is a guy who can be an athlete, shoot some threes, get some rebounds. I mean, he'd certainly be more productive than Tobias Harris was, for goodness sake.
Coming up, it's football at 4 in about 13 minutes from now. Andrew DeCecco as we look at the AFC South today. The Houston Texans are the favorites. What about Shane Steichen's crew? That's coming up 4 o'clock today. Football at 4 on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN.
You're listening.
At Zaxby's, we don't just make chicken fingers. We make the most premium tenderloin. 12-hour marinated, hand-breaded, fried to golden perfection. Deserves not 1, not 2, not even 3, but your choice of 12 dipping sauces chicken fingers. Chicken fingers that you can dip, dunk, or drizzle in ranch, and Zax sauce, and spicy Zax sauce, and honey mustard, and tongue torch, and barbecue. And I'm out of time. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
With Mike Gill.
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. I can't see him, but he talks to me.
On 97.3 ESPN.
See the Phillies AAA lineup today? Have you checked that out?
I have not checked out the AAA one.
Rojas, Buddy Kennedy, Cody Clements, Weston Wilson, then Cardenas, Garcia, Derek Hall, Scott Kingery, and Matt Kroon. So Rojas is in the leadoff spot down there at Lehigh Valley. Buddy Kennedy out of Millville. Cody Clements, when's he going to get back to the majors? Weston Wilson. It's a tough line. I mean, this is better than like the Rockies.
Actually, it is. What do you think about it? Hey, Rojas has been hitting well since he got down to AAA, Mike. You know, he looks like he's kind of found himself again.
I did see the one day he was like 4 for 4 and kind of, he had the bunt, he had the home run.
Yep.
I haven't really seen much of what he's done after that game.
He's been batting around 360 down there, so he's doing good.
Yeah, I mean, hey, listen, I think as the Phillies have said, in 7 games, he's actually hitting .414 with a .450 on base percentage. He's got 5 stolen bases in 7 games. Jeez. I mean, how lousy is the AAA pitching that this guy's hitting .414 with a .452 on base percentage?
Call him up now while his confidence is high, Mike. Let's go.
He's been hit by 2 pitches. It's pretty amazing. You're down there 7 games. You've been hit twice. A home run, 3 RBI, 5 steals.
He's turning into Kevin Stocker all of a sudden.
Interesting. So, I thought that was interesting. Their lineup tonight. The first 4 guys are all guys who have been up here. Scott Kingery down the bottom of the lineup. Kingery's actually having a pretty good year down there. Hey, when we come back, football at 4. Andrew DeCecco is in the house. He'll give us a look at the AFC South. Stick around.
97.3 ESPN presents The Sports Bash with Mike Gill. It's time for Football at 4 with Andrew DeCecco, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast.
We're never satisfied. That hunger for more. I have it. Everyone has it.
Now live, this is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Andrew DeCecco, as we continue through our division previews. We're at the AFC South, which, did you know that 3 teams in the AFC South finished with winning records last year? The top 3 teams all had winning records. I think most people think of the AFC South, they look at kind of a boring division. But Houston, the winner at 10-7, Indianapolis and Jacksonville both finished 9-8, and Tennessee was 6-11 last year. Andrew DeCecco is here. Maybe a little underrated AFC South. Andrew, what's going on, buddy?
Hey, Mike, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, brother. You know, you look at this AFC South, and I think you kind of think of, but Houston right now, a lot of people think this is maybe a Super Bowl contending team. Jacksonville last year, people thought that might have been a Super Bowl team last year. Indianapolis seems like it's on the way up, and Tennessee made a lot of changes. This is a pretty interesting division. So let's start at the top with Houston, 10-7. They were a team last year that some people thought was a 4-win team. They go and win 10 games, but now they have a lot of expectations. Are the expectations warranted for them?
Yeah, I think so. They're one of my favorite teams, at least on paper. I'm really, really high on C.J. Stroud, of course, going into his second season. You look at what he did last year, checked off a ton of boxes for me. He was my number 1 quarterback coming out, if you remember back to our draft conversations. I think he's just scratching the surface here. You look at what they surrounded him with offensively, wide receiver-wise, Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs comes over from Buffalo. Tank Dell had a really nice rookie season last year. Laramie Tunsil at left tackle, Titus Howard at right tackle, and then the backfield of Joe Mixon and Dameon Pierce. Pierce was a player that I thought was going to have a better rookie season than he had. His vision wasn't very good, and he didn't really take advantage of his opportunities. But I think that complementary pairing of Mixon and Pierce is going to help. And then Dalton Schultz working the middle of the field for a quarterback like C.J. Stroud entering his sophomore season is definitely going to help there. They've really done him a lot of favors by supplying that offense with adequate talent.
Yeah, you almost wonder where there's a weak spot on that offense. They've got the quarterback. They've got a good running back. They got 3 really talented receivers, plus Robert Woods, John Mechie, who was a high draft choice or a fun draft choice, fast guy there. Their offensive line, as you mentioned, this is a really complete offense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really do think that if they're able to stay healthy and everything fits in like it's supposed to, that I don't want to spoil my picks or anything, but I mean they can really go. They can do some damage and go far here. And I thought that for a young quarterback, a lot of times you see the quarterback they're not necessarily put in the most opportune spots, and they have to elevate the offense. Well, they've really done him a lot of favors by working on the offensive line, but also he has the continuity there with Bobby Slowick. Remember, Bobby Slowick, their offensive coordinator, was. He was a head coaching candidate, and I think having that continuity there is ultimately going to help C.J. Stroud take that next step, and then they obviously furnish the offense with a lot of playmakers.
Andrew, on defense, this is a team that we just looked at the completeness of their offense. Where does their defense sit in terms of helping them get to a Super Bowl, which seems like where a lot of people think this team could go?
Yeah, another player that I really liked going in that draft was Will Anderson. Will Anderson is a difference maker and somebody who, he was a little bit polarizing, I think, but I always really liked him coming out in the draft, and he's had a really good rookie season. He's going to build off of that. Then they added Daniil Hunter, who I really like. Of course, he has a very extensive body of work, and I think having him there with DeMeco Ryans and Matt Burke, their defensive coordinator, I mean, that is a really good situation for him. And then defensively, in the backfield, I would say Derek Stingley is someone he's had some injuries, but I think that he's a super talented player. He's got to be able to stay on the field and available. And Jalen Petrie, their safety, is a rangy center fielder. So they really do have some really good components there defensively to complement their offensive firepower.
Yeah, this is a interesting team, a team that was not a lot of expectations, and now they have those expectations. They were the AFC South champion from a year ago. Let's go over to Jacksonville. Many people thought, they were the team last year. They made that run, and then they got off to a really good start, and then much like the Eagles, they kind of fell on their face at the end, and everybody's wondering what happened to them. They added Brian Thomas. They lost Calvin Ridley. But when you look at, they signed Trevor Lawrence to that big deal. They got Christian Kirk. They added Gabe Davis. Where is this Jacksonville offense now with Trevor Lawrence making the big money?
Well, obviously all eyes are on Trevor Lawrence to elevate the performance of that offense, but also catapult that team to the standards that they're compensating him for, and that really they've invested in the offense, and he needs to be able to deliver. But let's look at it. Travis Etienne, the running back, is a player who I really like. I think that that's a pretty strong backfield that they have there. And then wide receiver wise, you mentioned Brian Thomas, who they drafted in the first round. Christian Kirk's still there, who they signed to a hefty free agent deal a couple of years ago. Gabe Davis comes over from Buffalo. And they also have Devin Duvernay, who comes over from the Ravens. He's going to factor in as a punt returner and a kick returner there. So he gives them a little bit of some added juice there from a depth perspective. Evan Ingram's a tight end who I think has had a good second act. He didn't really do much with the Giants. He battled a lot of injuries and things like that. But I think he gives the offense a little bit of a unique dimension as somebody who can operate the short to intermediary levels, but also stretch vertically and create mismatches that way. Looking at their offensive line, Cam Robinson and Anton Harrison. Anton Harrison, if you remember, is who they drafted in the first round back in 2023. He's their right tackle. So they have pieces there. There's no excuse for any sort of setbacks for that offense. Trevor Lawrence is going to have to step up and deliver.
Yeah, and, Trevor Lawrence gets that big deal. I don't know. He was the number one pick and thought to be kind of a can't-miss guy. What do you make of his career so far?
Yeah, very, very uneven. I thought that he fell short, or he came up small in the playoffs. It's so hard to find a franchise quarterback that teams are more apt to lock in with who they have versus the great unknown. If you look across the NFL, you see a lot of teams with middling quarterbacks because it's so difficult to find one. Jacksonville seems to think that they have one there, and they've definitely surrounded him with enough talent. I mean, this is a really big season for Doug Peterson down there. That if they're not able to meet expectations, you have to wonder what his future holds. But I think Trevor Lawrence has just been a very uneven pedestrian. You've seen the flashes of greatness at times, but it hasn't been enough to warrant the contract that he got. But look, this is a make or break season, I think, for him. Yeah,
you're kind of stuck in that situation where you have to make the decision, and if it's not him, then which avenue do you kind of drive down? And then this defense, Jacksonville, Armstead, Devin Lloyd, Josh Allen, they went out and got Travon Walker. I mean, this is a team that has some names on this defense, but is this a Super Bowl level defense?
Well, I mean, they certainly had pieces. I mean, drafting Travon Walker in the first round a couple of years ago, that definitely raised some eyebrows because he wasn't necessarily the consensus. There were other players who were up for that, up for that mantle. Eric Armstead's there, Josh Allen, Devin Lloyd, who you mentioned. Devin Lloyd's a really good second level player. They also have Olakun. He's there as a linebacker as well. Really rangy, good. Getting sideline to sideline and making plays and being disruptive. The secondary is interesting because you have guys like Ronald Darby, who's really a journeyman. Feels like he's been everywhere now. Tyson Campbell is a good young corner. They have Andre Sisco, and they also signed Darnell Savage, who is the safety from Green Bay for a number of seasons there. And Jerrion Jones is a player who they drafted in the fourth round out of Florida State. The Eagles actually hosted him on a 30 visit, and he had a number of them. So there's a lot of interest there. He's more of a nickel player, but they have some good components there on the back end.
Jacksonville, much like Philadelphia, very disappointing at the end of the year. We'll see if Doug Peterson, if they don't make the playoffs again, would he be a guy that possibly is on the hot seat in Jacksonville. Let's go to Indianapolis. Shane Steichen's crew, the former Eagles offensive coordinator, last year, 9 wins without his quarterback. Now he has Anthony Richardson back. They brought Joe Flacco in, by the way. Jonathan Taylor, one of the best running backs in the league. Michael Pittman. This is a team, though, that 9-8 because just doesn't have that explosive type of playmaker here. What do you think of Anthony Richardson in year 2 with what he has?
Well, he's explosive and he has a big arm, but you're right. They don't have the, you look at their receivers. Michael Pittman is more of a possession guy, a contested catch receiver. A.D. Mitchell, who they drafted, can provide some of those elements, but largely that they don't have those home run hitters. Jonathan Taylor, who you mentioned at running back, is a very solid player, and when healthy and all things are firing on all cylinders, he's one of the best running backs in the NFL. There's no disputing that. Quentin Nelson is still one of the best guards in the NFL, very consistent player. Jelani Woods at tight end. He's I think he's like 6'7", really athletic player, but sort of an enigma. You haven't seen enough consistency to definitively say that he's going to be a difference maker at that tight end spot. So it's ultimately going to come down to Anthony Richardson and what he's able to do, because I really like his upside. Like I said, massive arm, and he himself can elevate an offense to a playoff level, unit. So we'll have to see what happens.
Kwity Paye, I remember having conversations with you about him at the draft. Latu as well. They got Buckner. There's some interesting names on this side. Julian Blackmon, Jalen Jones now. So this defense, that's 9-8 last year with not a lot of star power or explosiveness on offense. But what about this defense? Is this the strength of their team?
I think it is. You mentioned Latu, who I thought was the more pro-ready of all the pass rushers in this year's draft. Very refined player. Kwity Paye is so steady. You and I had a lot of talks about Kwity Paye when he was coming out of Michigan a few seasons ago. Grover Stewart was perennially one of the more underrated defensive linemen in the NFL at that nose tackle spot. Buckner, we know what he's done when he was with the 49ers and what he's done since coming over to the Colts. Really disruptive player, can do a number of different things on that line. Juju Brents, their corner, was a player who I thought may get some first-round consideration a couple of years ago, or last year actually, and ended up going early second. Long, physical player. I think he can be a difference maker on the back end. You mentioned Julian Blackmon as safety, and Kenny Moore is still there, one of the nickel players, a nickel corner there. So I think that's going to be their they're going to have to hang their hat defensively. I don't know that they have enough offensively to really tilt things in their favor.
Yeah, it's interesting. Shane Steichen now will be in his second year there. Anthony Richardson. Joe Flacco, last year, Flacco took the Cleveland Browns to the playoffs. Richardson, if he struggles a little bit, you always wonder if that veteran guy is the guy that the people start calling for, especially one that has the pedigree of Flacco. So Richardson better get out of the gates pretty good here.
Yeah, he's going to have to, but I think he showed enough last season that you're going to see a lot of fans clamoring for his return. They love the upside. You see the arm talent. But you're right. If you get off to a slow start, you're going to start hearing some groans, knowing what Flacco just did, his most recent body of work. But there really isn't any comparison. And Flacco's not going to be able to take that offense to anywhere close to where Anthony Richardson is if he's fully healthy and dialed in.
Remember, Gardner Minshew quarterbacked the Colts last year, and he is now gone as well. Tennessee has kind of been the class of this division. Then last year, the wheels kind of finally fell off that Tennessee Titans team, which had been kind of ground and pound. New look now, though. Tony Pollard, the former Cowboy, is in. Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, Tyler Boyd. Is this going to be a high-flying offense for Will Levis?
Well, the big question becomes, what is Will Levis? What do they have in Will Levis? I don't know that I've seen enough to make a determination one way or the other, but you have the playmakers, so that certainly helps to elevate your performance. So I think that they've done a really good job. You mentioned Calvin Ridley and Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd, especially operating over the middle of the field, is going to be so important for a quarterback like Will Levis. Skoronski at left guard, and they drafted J.C. Latham at the 8th overall pick this year. Having that left side fortified is going to be of the utmost importance. Chigawanko, their tight end, is somebody who I've been enamored with athletically. He just hasn't been a focal point in their offense, but I think if he puts it together, and perhaps this is the season that he will, fantasy football owners or players, he might be a player that you can get as a sleeper. I think that because of all the surrounding talent I think he will be the beneficiary of some targets. So I like what they have there.
Yeah, that offense is going to be really interesting. When and by the way, Mason Rudolph, Malik Willis are the other quarterbacks there. So Will Levis, the starter, but Willis they drafted in the 3rd round. Mason Rudolph, of course, comes over from Pittsburgh. So it's interesting quarterback room with a lot of talent, but where is this talent? Pollard, I was a big fan of him, and then he had that injury in Dallas. They didn't really use him. I never thought they used Pollard the right way, but he's been there. Ridley, Ridley, of course, coming from Jacksonville now. Hopkins is kind of bound. Is Hopkins at that point in his career where he's just, or do you think he still has something left?
Oh, I think he still has something left. He doesn't strike me as somebody that's going to hang around if he doesn't feel like he's operating at full capacity, or at least close to it. He's still somebody who is going to give defensive backs fits. He's going to go up and attack the football. I think having him on the field alone is going to draw coverage naturally in his direction and free things up for teammates. I think he still has something left. They have probably the best receiving core. It rivals the Texans, I would say, but that they've done some really good things in reshaping that receiving core and giving Will Levis something to work with.
Yeah, he had a lot of injury problems during his Arizona tenure the last 2 years, so we'll see what ends up happening for DeAndre Hopkins with Tennessee. And, of course, now you go to that defensive side of the ball, and this has been a team that has been Mike Vrabel living on the defense. Jeffrey Simmons kind of leading that side of the ball, Hooker and Key and Snead now. If they play some good defense, this team's going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, L'Jarius Sneed, who comes over from the Chiefs, and Jeffrey Simmons are going to be the two anchors of that defense. They also drafted Tavondre Sweat in the 2nd round, defensive lineman from Texas. He's going to be somebody that they really hang their hat on. Harold Landry's still there, of course, as an edge rusher, and he can still affect the game, providing pressure on the passer. Cedric Gray, the linebacker from North Carolina, is somebody who they added in the 4th round. I thought the Eagles might take a look at him. They ended up going with Jalix Hunt at pick number 90, I believe, in the 3rd round. But I think that Gray is a good value player for them who I think can factor in early as a contributor defensively. I'm not sure if he's going to start right away, but I really like what he can bring, especially from a long-term perspective. And Chigawuzie, I don't know if I mentioned him, but he's a veteran corner that he's very physical, and I think he is somebody that you can take advantage of down the field, but he's played a lot of football. I think having him back there along with Roger McCreary, who is their nickel player, gives them a lot of optionality there on the back end.
Andrew DeCecco, Football at 4 from the Inside the Birds podcast and, of course, InsideTheBirds.com. That is the AFC South. A quick look over. By the way, Houston, Jacksonville, Indianapolis all finished with winning records last year. Tennessee was 6-11 in the basement. How do you see this division finishing this season?
Well, I have the Texans as the class of this division, at the head of the class. They're 1. Then I have Jacksonville at 2, Tennessee at 3, Colts at 4.
Ooh. All right. So a little mix up there as the Colts finished 9-8 last year. They get Anthony Richardson back. But man, they had 3. I think when somebody says AFC South, it's not all that exciting of a division. But 3 teams with winning records, last season. So, keep an eye on how competitive this division will be. All right, Andrew DeCecco, our division previews will continue next week with the West, the AFC West, home of the defending Super Bowl champions. And, of course, new John Harbaugh's in that division now. The Vegas Raiders have, an interesting team. And, of course, the Denver Broncos, is this going to be the end for Sean Payton out there? So we'll get into that next week with Andrew right here on Football at 4 here on the Sports Best. Thanks, bud.
Have a good one.
Yeah, man, hearing him break these down kind of gets me ready for training camp as we are inside a month to training camp. But, when I was doing the research for the AFC South today, I said, did you know 3 teams finished with a winning record in the AFC South? Does that seem like a division that has 3 teams with winning records in it? Doesn't strike me as that, but 3 teams had a winning record last year. By the way, the NBA draft is set to go back up. And round 2 is back underway now. We'll get you the Sixers pick when that happens here on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app powered by First Bank of Sea Isle City. And, of course, streaming live video on the X platform at 97.3 ESPN. I'm your host, Mike Hill. What's up, everybody? And, of course, Football at 4 is brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. When the Sixers pick happens, we will bring it to you here on the Sports Bash. Yesterday, Jared McCain. We'll talk about that with Austin Krell, our Sixers insider, tonight at 5 o'clock. He has a great story on our website, 973ESPN.com, on how that pick ended up happening. That's over on our website, 973ESPN.com. When we come back, it's another edition of Nick's Nuggets. Nick Earnshaw is here with his Nuggets for the day. I'm sure his nugget that he's not too happy about, Spencer Turnbull on the injured list, and it could be a 6-week absence for Spencer. Who replaces him? All that and more during Nick's Nuggets today. Coming up on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN.
We have the...
When it comes to Zaxby's Fingers, there's a few non-negotiables. It's gotta be only premium tenderloin, marinated for 12 hours and fried to crispy perfection. What is negotiable? The flavors you create mixing our 12 signature sauces. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
Traffic.
You come with me.
The Sports Bash with Mike Gill on 97.3 ESPN and the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app.
427 Sports Fast Live, 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app, streaming live video on the X platform at 973 ESPN. Use the hashtag SB Live. Nick Earnshaw's back for Nick's Nuggets. Got the draft going on. Kyle Filipowski going to Utah. That was the most recent pick. If the Sixers make a pick, we'll let you know. They're up at 41, so right now they are at number 33, I believe, in the second round. Nick Earnshaw's Nuggets, they're brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Nick Earnshaw, host of the Shift podcast and producer of The Locker Room with Billy Schweim, Saturdays here on 97.3 ESPN. What's up, Nick Earnshaw?
What's going on, Mike? And speaking of The Locker Room, I got a little bit of word. We might be having a big guest come on Saturday. I think that's good for. I can't say who it is yet, but we got a big time guest coming on. Baseball fans will be excited. I think.
All right,
it's gonna be fun.
It's a good tease.
I can't wait. Yeah, so it'll be a fun show Saturday for sure. All right, but Mike, we got to talk basketball a little bit. And you said they're right around the 33rd pick right now. Based upon how fast the draft was moving last night, we might get the Sixers pick during the Nuggets today. Who knows? Because that draft was moving so fast last night, and it moved quickly to that 16th pick, Mike. And I was waiting all night long. Like, all right, they're going to probably move the pick. It felt like they were probably going to move it, right? Adam Silver comes out. He's like, we have a trade to announce. And they were just announcing a trade from earlier in the draft, which is pretty funny because the Sixers took a lot of time to make this pick. That clock was going all the way down into like the minutes and like really, really low with time to go. But they ended up taking Jared McCain out of Duke, Mike. It's been some negative reaction to this pick. There's been some positive reaction. It's kind of been mixed reviews overall. I mean, I like the pick. I think it's a solid pick. He's a solid player, little small, but he can shoot the three. And you know, what do the Sixers need? They need guys that can shoot the three from beyond the arc. Now, how much of a contributor will he be right away? I don't know. That remains to be seen. But listen, last year at Duke, he was 42% on catch and shoot threes. That's what he shot from beyond the arc. Yeah, that's something that I think is very interesting. And, you know, he shot 40% from three regularly, but on the catch and shoot three, that's where he was the most dominant. And I think that's something the Sixers need. They lack. I get all the stuff, outside noise, the TikTok, the social media, whatever. He can do whatever he wants. He's knocking down threes for the Sixers and making big time shots. It's a great pick. I'm a little concerned with the size. You and I texted earlier about this. Like, do you match him up with Maxey and McCain? It's a small backcourt. On defense, it's a little bit of a liability there. But I don't think it's an awful pick. I'm just kind of waiting to see what they do after this, right? Like, I would think they would have traded it, to be honest.
I think they tried to, didn't have any takers, nothing that was appealing. A lot of people said, though, no, they tried. And then when they saw McCain was there still, they didn't think he was going to be there, that they fell in love with the pick. I don't hate the player. I don't love the fit. The size is very, it's hard to see him and Maxey getting a lot of time together. I know Nick Nurse had Lowry and Van Vliet together in Toronto, two guys who were smaller than both McCain and Maxey. That was brought up. We had Keith Pompey on earlier. He said that they kind of view him as a guy to come off the bench, not a starter right away. Yes, he can shoot, but Very small, tough guy. I know. I like what Jay Billis described him at. As a winner, a leader. A guy who's just a tough-minded guard. 5 rebounds a game for a smaller guy. So, hey, I don't love the size thing, but I think they got a pretty good player here.
Yeah, I think he's a solid player. And with most of these guys coming out of the draft now with how young they are, he's 20 years old, right? I don't expect him to be a starter on a playoff contender, a team that wants to go to a championship right away. I just don't see that. I wonder if do you think he gets run in the G League for a little while? I don't know. I feel like he's good enough to be on the roster and get in the rotation. He's just so young. You know what I mean? You have to see how the rest of the roster is filled out. Because they have nobody on the roster right now. I mean, they have Joel Embiid. Maxey technically still isn't signed. He'll be back. Paul Reed, and Ricky Council III. I just don't know kind of the idea of where they're going here. There's so many other factors that have to play into this. Do they re-sign Kelly Oubre? Do they bring back Kyle Lowry, right? Where does he fit in to the mix here? And I think he's a talented player. It's just, I don't know where he fits into this rotation. He's not going to start. No way he starts. But it's just too early on in his career. Maybe he surprises everybody and comes off the bench, hits some big threes. I would liken it to maybe Landry Shamet from a few years back, right? Remember how much run he got early on in the season because he was hitting the three. Maybe McCain could kind of be that type of player before they traded him for Tobias Harris, but he could be that type of player for the Sixers early part of the season. And if he continues to be consistent, maybe he does get some run if he hits those big shots.
Yeah, I think he's a guy who can come in and shoot and score right away in the league. I mean, it just, again, how does the fit? Because we don't know who else is even on this roster.
Yeah.
That's one of the problems. There's nobody else here right now. Right now you have McCain, Maxey, Embiid. Those 3 guys. I mean,
and Ricky, you can't forget about Ricky Council. He's another energy guy. I mean, listen, they're going to have the biggest smiles in the backcourt ever with Maxey and Jared McCain. That's a happy backcourt right there. A lot of positive energy. I just don't know if you're going to see them together that much. That's the problem.
Well, again, like I said before, they did play Van Vliet and Lowry together. Both guys smaller than Maxey and McCain. But as Pompey mentioned earlier, don't view him as a starter. Maybe a guy who can fill some of the Maxey minutes, and then they play together for a short amount of time. But, hey, listen, I'm interested to see what happens when they make their pick today. Do they even make that pick? Are they going to use it for something else?
Yeah.
And then don't forget, free agency opens on Sunday. So that will be when we really begin to see what the plan is for this team. Because I got to be honest with you, there's not a lot in free agency that's all that attractive. So I don't know how many different avenues and roads you could even go down here that would get people excited about the direction of this team.
Yeah, it's just I wonder if they move him. They could move him, right? At this point, they could still utilize him in a trade. Maybe he's not even a Sixer. Maybe they move him in a different deal to go get another star or something along those lines. A Brandon Ingram, a Jimmy Butler, etc. That could happen still too. It's a little bit confusing with the direction because you didn't really get a ton of answers last night from Daryl Morey. He did say that they do want to be the best team in the Eastern Conference. Well, you don't have a roster yet, so you don't know how the heck this is going to happen and what's going to go down in the rest of the offseason. There's just too many questions that still need to be answered, and most of them are probably going to be answered Sunday night. As soon as 6 p.m. hits, Mike, I'm going to have my alarm set at 5:55, 5:56, 57, 58, and 59, just so I'm awake, alert, and ready to go once 6 o'clock hits, because those tweets are going to be fired off for the Sixers. I just wonder if it's going to be a trade, if they're already going to sign some pieces, like a Caldwell Pope. He's now on the market, right? He's going to have a lot of interest. Sixers definitely going to be interested in Caldwell Pope, another guy who's been a championship pedigree type player, role player. That's a guy you want to come in. McCain, it's just very curious to see the fit. There's so many dominoes that need to fall right now.
Yeah, you're at a spot now where, listen, we talked about this with Keith earlier. Sunday, when free agency opens, that is when you think, hey, where's this move that we're maybe not hearing about? What's this, what does Daryl Morey have up his sleeve? Because right now we're not seeing it because there's just not a lot available right now.
Now, Mike, I'll throw this question at you. Remember when they signed Elton Brand, who's still a part of this organization and making decisions for this team? Back, it was 08, 09, around that offseason when they had all that money, they go out and get Elton Brand. Is this an offseason that could be as disappointing as that one, or could it be even worse? Could the letdown even be worse with the expectations the Sixers do have and with the players like Embiid and Maxey, where you have guys who are stars and not putting the pieces around them with all this money?
This free agent class just isn't very good. That's the problem. I mean, so it's when you have the cap space, you have to use it, and this is all you're, afforded to is Paul George, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. There's just not a lot of options in free agency here, so it's disappointing. But you can only do, we talked about this in the first hour. Morey has spent so much time cleaning up the mess of the previous regime of getting out of so many of the bad contracts, and this has happened to be where it lined up. So now you got to get creative and figure out what to do with the cap space. But yeah, I think at the end, unless something comes out of right field, it's going to end up being pretty disappointing. Now, we talked about it yesterday with Paul Hudrick, is you could do a lot of these one-year deals and then go back and hope that you clear cap space out and go back into free agency again next year.
Yeah, but then you're wasting another year of Embiid, right?
That's the problem.
That's the other part of this is like, all right, like Embiid's not getting any younger. He's had the injury problems. Do you want to waste another year, or do you want to just head into the Maxey era of this and move on? Like, you could blow it up at that point. You know what I mean? So, like, you can't just waste year after year after year. You got to do something here with the amount of money. So as much as we've talked about this free agent class not being up to par and up to standard with a lot of talent, you have to do something here. Like, you're wasting too much time. You've already wasted a ton of seasons already. And last year was kind of, we'll try, but we won't really try to go for it. This year was supposed to be the year to go for it, and the talent level just isn't there.
Hey, listen, you can only do what's out there. I mean, people, that's the thing that bothers me so much, though. Well, he didn't do anything. Somebody said earlier, like, you could have traded for Drew Holiday or Porzingis. No, you couldn't. You had nothing to give those teams that they wanted from you. You can't make somebody want something from you that you don't have. The Sixers did not have anything that was anywhere near desirable to give up for those guys last year. And quite frankly, you have nothing again right now on your roster. You have no players on your roster to move. Now, you could say, hey, you have some draft choices, but like Drew Holiday last year, that was a 3-team trade, if I remember correctly, right?
I believe so, yeah. And you have to remember that the Sixers didn't get those picks back until they traded Harden. And
they had somebody texted in they could have traded draft picks. I said, no, they couldn't. They didn't have any at that time last year. So people are like, they got to do something. Or, you got to do something. The problem is you have nobody on your current roster right now. You cannot do anything until, you can't make a trade until you get somebody on the roster, really. I mean, so you're kind of in a weird spot, and there's nobody in free agency that you're all that excited about. Yeah, last year, Holiday got traded with DeAndre Ayton and a first-round pick to the Portland Trailblazers. Yep. The 3-team deal that's saying Dame Lillard to the Bucks. So the Sixers did not have anywhere near the ammunition to make that kind of deal.
No, they didn't. I mean, and once they traded Harden, that's when they got some of the picks back. Now this year, you just don't have anybody on your roster to give up. Well, you give up Paul Reed and Ricky Council. I don't know how much that'll command. You know what I mean? So it's very interesting. We're not going to know the answers until about Sunday to some of these questions we do have. McCain, nice player. Don't know how he fits yet. We'll see. It depends on how they build the roster. Going to be very fascinating. I'm going to have those alarms set, Mike, 5 minutes before, just going off, bang, 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 to see what happens with the 76ers and NBA free agency. All right, let's move on to nugget number 2, going to the Phils. Speaking of trading, guys, we've talked about the trade deadline a lot with the Phillies. We know some of their needs, an arm out of the bullpen, as well as another right-handed bat and outfielder. And a guy that's names come up periodically in the Phillies realm for a trade is Jazz Chisholm. So I don't know if you saw this, Mike. Bowden had an article in The Athletic. He talked to over 35 baseball executives and asked them who is most likely to be traded, who's going to be on the move. And Jazz Chisholm was the number 1 outfielder that is going to be on the move. And it was also mentioned that Bowden named the Phillies and Giants as teams that he'd fit nicely with. Now, Chisholm has a big personality. He was on the cover of MLB The Show a couple of years ago, but he's 26 years old. He's very young. The Marlins are going nowhere. Phillies are actually playing the Marlins tonight, starting a 4-game series. And he's batting .264, 330 OBP, 438 slug. He's got 10 home runs, 37 RBIs, 14 steals. Would Jazz Chisholm suffice Mike Gill, the Phillies' problems in center field? Is that a name you would want them to go after?
Nothing's changed from the last time we had this discussion, which is no. Jazz Chisholm doesn't do a lot for me. Like right now, we were talking about this last hour. Johan Rojas leading off for the Iron Pigs. He's hitting over 400 with a 450 on base percentage, 5 stolen bases in 7 games. You're looking at his swing; it looks a lot shorter, much more compact. Jazz Chisholm to me doesn't do much, doesn't move the needle. This is a team that the Phillies need a different type of hitter. They need something that's different from the kind of guys that they have on this team. Jazz Chisholm, big strikeout guy. He's another guy who strikes out, too much for my liking. 264 this year. Hits for a little bit of power, but where are you hitting him in this lineup? What's he doing for you? I don't know, man. I just think Jazz Chisholm's just for me.
It would be an upgrade, though. He would still be an upgrade in center field right now. I know Rojas is doing great in AAA, but it hasn't translated to the major leagues yet. That's the problem. It hasn't translated yet. So hopefully he can get his confidence back. Maybe you do bring Rojas back. But Chisholm would still be an upgrade in center field for this team. I mean, when you're playing David Dahl out in left field and Whit Merrifield, who's done nothing for you, to add Chisholm to this lineup, I think would be great. Because then I want to ask you this. The number one reliever on the market that executive think's going to be moved, definitely going to be moved from the Marlins, is Tanner Scott. Tanner Scott has a below 1.50.
Well, yeah. Now, if you throw Tanner Scott into my conversation, that's a different story.
So you could kill 2 birds with 1 stone here. I mean, you could get Tanner Scott as well as Jazz Chisholm in a trade if you want to do that with the Marlins. Remember, they have a history. They got Real Muto from the Marlins. So why not try and go get Chisholm and another reliever? You solve 2 problems in 1 right there. It's better than the Oakland thing with Mason Miller and et cetera.
I don't know. Depends on what I'm giving. If I have to give up a lot for Jazz Chisholm, I'm not all that excited. If this is one of those things where the Miami Marlins are just saying, hey, we want to, get this salary off of our books and we want to move on, that's a different story. But if it's a salary dump type of thing, but I'm not not a big Jazz Chisholm guy. That's all.
I think I like Chisholm. I think he can steal bases. He's got a little bit of power. He's pretty good out there in center field defensively. I wouldn't mind bringing him in. And if you could throw Tanner Scott into the mix.
Another problem, by the way, with Chisholm that we haven't got to is another thing that was at the top of my. He hits left-handed.
He does hit left-handed. I get it.
So that puts him way at the top of my list of why I'm not interested.
But you're getting Real Muto back. You'll have another righty in there. It'll be lefty dominant. But hey, I mean, he's batting .264 this year.
He's a left-handed bat. Where am I hitting? That's another guy that is, where am I doing with him? Is he going to play? So he's in a left field platoon. Is he hitting every day? Marsh isn't in the lineup today. Stott's not in the lineup today. So is Chisholm also not going to be in the lineup, when a lefty pitches? To me, too many lefties, not good enough, not an impactful enough lefty.
All right. I hope they get Tanner. If they get Tanner Scott, I'm all in on this type of trade because I love Tanner Scott. He's been fantastic this year. All right. Nugget number 3. I want to stick with baseball, Mike. And I want to talk about the MVP race right here. Bryce Harper is second in betting odds for the MVP this year. It would be his 3rd MVP, I believe, of his career. So Ohtani's at the top of the list. He leads almost in all categories, but Harper's right there, right behind him. Should Harper get the MVP over Ohtani? If you were to vote today, should Harper get it over Shohei because he's in the field? He's also playing the field. Should a DH win the MVP? That's my question because I don't think a DH only. I get he's been fantastic. Leads the league in home runs, all these different categories. Fine. But he's not even pitching this year. He's not in the field. Bryce Harper learned a new position, is playing very well defensively at that position, and is right behind Ohtani in all these categories. I think he should get a consideration to be the MVP and over Ohtani because Ohtani's just a DH.
Yeah, I mean, you make a compelling argument, obviously, is that Harper's also learning a new defensive position here. He's hitting .305. He's got 20 home runs. His on-base percentage is .402. So I think the numbers, suggest that he's in the conversation. Now, we were talking about this with Freddie Freeman, because, just their numbers in terms of, what was it, the All-Star game?
Probably the All-Star vote, right? Would it be starting for the All-Star game? Is that what you're probably the conversation?
What was that conversation Josh and I were having last week about Freddie Freeman was I think it was the best player at every position. Alec Boehm, right, was the Bleacher Report did the best player at every position. They picked Freeman over Harper. And Freeman's 299, which is right about where Harper is. 400 on base percentage. The home runs, Harper's winning there. But Ohtani at 322 with a 402 on base, 25 homers, 61 RBI. But I mean, so the numbers aren't like astronomically better for Ohtani. Now 322 is pretty darn good.
Yeah.
The 25 home runs, his numbers are better than Harper's all the way across the board. Basically, what you're saying is, the gap is that one guy plays defense and the other guy doesn't.
Right.
And we all know that the MVP is not a defensive-minded award. They don't care about your defense.
No, they only care about the bat. But the numbers, I mean, they're better, but they're not astronomically better, right? They're not like they're within like a margin of error. And they have the same on base percentage. The average is a little bit more. He's right behind him in home runs, right behind him in OPS. RBIs as well. Like Harper's numbers are right there, almost on par with Ohtani's for the most part. He's still leading by a couple of strokes here, but I think if you add in Harper being on the defensive side of things, he's learning a new position. Also, if you take Harper out of the lineup, what happens to this Phillies team? Also, if you take Ohtani out of the Dodgers, I don't think you really miss a beat because he's not even pitching this year. So I think Harper has a very compelling argument and should probably overtake Ohtani at some point.
Well, I don't know about that. Well, I don't think that's fair. I think we'll see because Mookie Betts, who was also an MVP candidate, he's out of the lineup. And what have the Dodgers done without him? Well, they haven't really lost any ground without him because, they have a guy like Ohtani. So listen, I would say that the case is fair to say for Harper with the defense, but they don't care about defense. This is not a defensive award. This is a offensive award, the MVP. So Harper's defense, while it's a nice, compelling argument, it doesn't bear any meaning here, and he's not having a better offensive year than Ohtani is.
No, he's not. He's not having a better offensive year, but the numbers are there. The numbers are definitely
there. Close.
He's right
They're
behind.
close.
They're very close.
Yeah, and they're close, but Harper is essentially not beating him in any category.
He's right. He's tied with him in on-base percentage. He's right behind him in OPS. He's right behind him in home runs. He's a couple home runs away, 5, I believe, behind Ohtani. So
he's 5 behind.
Right there.
Yeah, he's 5 home runs behind. Yep. He is about 6 or 5 RBI behind. He is, he's about 20 points off or 17 points off in the batting average. The on-base percentage is the same. The slugging percentage, Ohtani hasn't beat there. The OPS, Ohtani hasn't beat considerably there. The WAR, Ohtani has essentially every check mark. If you want to add defense in, that's a completely different conversation. If you're talking about MVP, defense doesn't play here.
I have to throw the defense in there. I will make the argument for Bryce by the end of the season. I'm still giving it to him, Mike. That's my final nugget, though. Third and final one.
And I will say this, both teams are at first place, far and away out in front of their division. So, you can't say, well, one team's better than the other. Both teams are really good. You got one team at 53 wins, the other one at 51. I will say, Harper lost Trey Turner and the Phillies game, and now Betts is out, and the Dodgers are still pulling away. They've won 4 straight, by the way, 8 out of 10 without Mookie Betts. So, hey, you got to give Ohtani credit for that, for helping that team kind of stay afloat there. It's going to be interesting, though, because
they play soon. I'll add that in there. I wonder who has the better series when the Dodgers and Phillies play in like the middle of July. I think that'll be
the Phillies play the Marlins, then the Cubs,
Mm-hmm.
then the Braves, and then the Dodgers.
Yep.
But that Braves series is coming up. Now the Braves were kind of creeping. They got to was it 6?
I think it was 6. I think it was 6. They were right behind the Phillies.
They got to 6 for a day.
They're within striking distance. So
now they're back to 8 now.
But that's still within. I mean, one bad stretch for you, a couple weeks. I mean, you could fall behind if the Braves start winning some games, stringing together some wins.
Now,
I mean,
I'm surprised that I'm surprised that one of your Nuggets didn't include Spencer Turnbull out 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah, I know. I did see that. It's, I figured it was going to be bad when he goes out of the game after 36 pitches. 6 to 8 weeks is a long time. We talked about Mercado a lot yesterday. He's going to slide in and be that fifth starter until Taijuan Walker comes back. We'll have to see how Mercado does because, we talked to him ad nauseum yesterday, coming from the Rays organization. So he's going to be fascinating to watch. He's pitched really well in AAA.
All right. Yeah, that's the news today. Spencer Turnbull out 6 to 8 weeks, and he has got a right lat strain, so we'll see what the Phillies do when Taijuan Walker's back. Michael Mercado will make the next start. That's Nick's Nuggets here on the Sports Bash. Thanks, Nick.
All right, Mike, I'll talk to you.
All right, more Nuggets tomorrow here on the Sports Bash, and they're brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. I'm Mike Gill. This is the Sports Bash live on 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app. Hey, coming up, Austin Krell, our Sixers insider from 97.3 ESPN.com, will join us as the Sixers will probably be making their pick right when Austin joins us. They are at pick number 38 right now. The Knicks pick is on the board, although I think the Knicks, did they trade for this pick or did they trade the pick away? I don't know. I saw the Knicks made a trade. I don't know if it involved this pick. I think it did. They traded this pick 38 to Oklahoma City. So we'll get Austin's thoughts on Jared McCain, the new Sixer, and when they make their pick at 41, which is going to be happening in probably about 5 minutes. Stick around. More Sports Bash coming up.
This is the Sports Bash with Mike Gill on 97.3 ESPN and the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app. Now live from inside the Ocean Casino Resort Studio, here's Mike Gill.
5 o'clock, Sports Bash, right in time. Sixers are on the board next. Our Sixers insider, Austin Krell from 97.3 ESPN.com is here. We'll get his live reaction to the Sixers pick. We'll also get his thoughts on the move they made last night. Jared McCain from Duke is the newest Sixer. He undersized, wears number 0. Very intriguing. Much like the guy they already have on the team, Austin Krell. What did you think of McCain and the fit at number 16 last night as we get ready for them to make pick number 41?
Well, we all thought that they were going to trade the pick, and so I was surprised that they made the selection. Daryl alluded to some opportunities they had to trade that pick away and get quote unquote interesting players. At that pick, he also left the door open that they could still revisit trades for said player. There is a team in New York that is clearly undergoing a teardown, so I wonder if maybe that was a team involved in those talks, because that would be a team that has incentive to continue to revisit trade scenarios about some of their better players, especially if it includes draft assets, looking at you Brooklyn Nets and Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith specifically. But I would say, look, like Jared McCain, undersized guard, we will see, if he is able to break the rotation at any point during his rookie year. There is a skill set that the Sixers will always need as long as Joel is there in the shooting. He's undersized for sure. That poses limitations on how realistic it is for him to step in at any point and be a starting player for the Sixers in an ecosystem of Tyrese Maxey, because one is 6'2", the other claims he's 6'3". We'll see what, we never quite know how tall the guys really are. Is it hint? We never actually quite know, but they're going to get targeted on defense, those two, if they're on the floor together. But we talked to him last night. Really nice kid, very charismatic, very happy. Smiled the entire time we talked to him. I do see some Tyrese in the personality, and I wonder if that was something the Sixers saw as well. And maybe that was, that they see like the way that Tyrese works and his personality, and maybe they conflated that with what this guy could be. So all that is to say, who knows what he will become, but the shot should translate no problem. And, it's a new face. It's a new face, something for the fans who like draft picks can get excited about. But in the interest of helping Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey right away, we will see if this kid can do that.
Yeah, I was going to say, from the sound that you're bringing us right now, Austin, it doesn't sound like you think he will be a big contributor this rookie season.
I think if the Sixers wanted to be unique instead of traditional, meaning, traditionally, like, you have to wait and earn your stripes before you break into the rotation and get time on the court as a rookie or as a young player in this league, I think there will always be opportunities where they could say, hey, we could use some more shooting in this scenario tonight. Let's bring him in and see what he can do for us. So it depends on what the Sixers and their coaching staff are feeling. Also depends if he can earn the trust and be like, yeah, I can hold up defensively. You can trust me with the ball in my hands and I will make shots. Part of why Isaiah Joe didn't stick here was because when the opportunities came, he missed a lot of shots. He didn't make enough of his threes. And so, like, if you got to capitalize when you're a shooter. I certainly have questions as to whether he is ready to contribute immediately. I also think that, if you're a well-run organization, well-run team, you can't succumb to the pressure of like getting players who are ready to go immediately. You have to take everything that you have available to you, whether that be trades, draft picks, whatever, and evaluate whether the piece that you can get in the draft at that moment is better off long-term or better off in the short term than making a trade just to, satisfy, what you might need in the next 6 months to a year.
Mm-hmm. You have a piece over at 97.3ESPN.com about the Sixers' decision there. What was the decision? What was going on as the Sixers were getting ready to get on the board?
Heard a bunch of different things over the course of the last couple weeks, as you can probably imagine. It's still very unclear to me concretely whether they were always 100% in on Jared McCain as he fell. They were excited and, that was the guy always, or if they were, mixed between a couple different candidates. People were gushing over Dalton Knecht as he fell late out of the lottery and ended up being the next pick after the Sixers. I can see why Knecht would be an interesting name because he's 6'6", slots in nicely on the wing, sniper. He looks like JJ Redick. I'll put it that way. So therefore people think, oh, he's probably a shooter ready to go. And the Sixers need shooting and size. There was concern about Dalton Knecht's age. So, there was some sliding there. The way that Daryl said it sounded like they had their eyes on Jared McCain for at least some time. They never met with him individually in the pre-draft process. It was covert. It was, them not trying to show their cards. And, Daryl said to us last night, as it hit pick 12, 13, we kind of started to, get a little bit restless and excited. And then Miami comes up at 15. They're stressed out because they're thinking one pick away and this could be our opportunity. And Miami went with Khalil Ware, and that set them up to take Jared McCain, who they seem to have wanted for a while.
Yeah, you talk about, we're talking with Austin Krell from 97.3ESPN.com. Check out his piece right now over on the website about the Sixers' decision to select McCain there because Morey said there was a pretty interesting player offered to Philadelphia. So if you didn't take a pretty interesting player and you took this player and he doesn't have a big role on your team or doesn't have a defined role in the team, do you look at that and say, hey, is this team in position to do what they do what they did, and take a player that you don't know that we'll have a defined role over a player that possibly could have stepped right in, because it doesn't look like, and we'll get into this a little bit more, that free agency is going to offer you that player that you're looking for. At least the tea leaves aren't reading that direction. It could be a surprise, but it doesn't look that way.
So I think a couple things here, and this should not be taken as hardcore reporting or as saying this will or will not happen, but you look at the landscape of the NBA and you say, like, okay, Daryl Morey says that they had an interesting player made available to them in trades, and it was potentially a guy that they could revisit acquiring down the road. And the Sixers are taking a center at number 41, which is interesting. And why is that interesting? This is, this is my Brian Windhorst moment where my fingers go up in the air. You see, I interrupt the question because the Sixers are taking Adam Bona, who is a center out of UCLA. Now, you see, why would they take a center? They already have Joel. They already have Paul Reed. Paul Reed's contract is not guaranteed because the Sixers did not make the second round of the playoffs this year. So the Sixers could say, well, we want to create additional cap space in the coming days leading up to free agency. They could then, in theory, let Paul Reed go. And in drafting a center, you open up the door to that possibility of, hey, is Paul Reed suddenly going to be out the door? And is that going to create some additional cap space for this team? So that's very fascinating that they took Adem Bona with the 41st pick in this draft. Now, Mike,
targeting.
Back to your question.
Targeting. They're targeting Adam Bona.
Right.
It hasn't officially been made yet, but that's who they are targeting at number 41. So there's a lot of pieces there, right? You say they took the center right there. Now they got the guard. Could you see a situation where McCain's not here?
It sounded to me, I mean, they posted him all over their social media. They let us interview him. It sounds to me like McCain will be here. Now, your question, original question before I interrupted because of the news, about trading for a guy who can help immediately versus McCain, who might be inconsistent rotation at best.
Right, and that's based on, too, obviously Joel is getting, how many more years do you have with Joel that you can have a 20-year-old kid that you don't know what his role is?
Right. So Daryl says, we have this interesting player available to us, and he says it's something that we could revisit potentially later on. How many teams out there are willing to offer interesting players for first-round picks right now? It's the ones that are not in position to make the playoffs anytime soon. Could that be the Washington Wizards and Kyle Kuzma? Could that be Brooklyn Nets and Cam Johnson? Could they be Brooklyn Nets and Dorian Finney-Smith? All guys that could play on the wing, forward position, whatnot. So you do wonder if that is something where, those are the scenarios they're looking at, where they think, okay, we can still get our guy at 16 in Jared McCain, and these teams might still be open for business in a week, and we can trade future picks to get those guys. I will say this. In keeping McCain, one of the fascinating storylines of last night's draft for the Sixers was if they kept the pick, they would not be telegraphing, Paul George coming to Philadelphia or not. If they traded that pick away,
let me ask you, where do you stand on that right now? Is that happening, or do you think the Paul George thing, is that done?
It seems less likely and less likely by the day. But crazier things have happened. People have surprised us before.
Okay.
But I do think this. There was chatter could they trade for Brandon Ingram on draft night? They did nothing of the sort to suggest that they are in or out on any of these star level players that could be available. If they had traded for Cam Johnson, let's say, because Brooklyn is obviously rebuilding, that would have taken them out of the running for Paul George. So in keeping the pick, they still retained all of their options that they could have had in free agency. There's no, big chunk of cap space eaten up by this situation. So they are still have a lot of flexibility, a lot of options. I know that is great in theory, and in practice, but in practice, it can't be great in theory, and then in practice, you swing and miss on everybody, and none of it matters anyway. But last night, towards the end, like Daryl said, our plans in the draft have nothing to do with our free agency. None of this is going to affect what we plan on doing. So I think they maintain their optionality with what they did, and given the options available to them at pick 16. It sounds like they felt like we can come back to this very shortly if we want to, and involve future picks. The Sixers have five tradable first round picks that they can include in deals if they were to, transact with some of these teams that are candidates to, move valuable pieces.
Austin Krell, at NBA Krell on X. And of course, the Sixers just made their pick. Adem Bona from, UCLA, defensive minded guy. He's one of the top shot blockers in the program over 2 seasons, scores a little bit, very athletic. I mean, as you just kind of chronicled, maybe he's the replacement for Paul Reed, and then you use Paul Reed, in some sort of thing, because Austin, how can they get creative with nobody on the roster to make said moves?
Well, that's the thing. So I understand the frustration with the Knicks get Mikal Bridges and you guys are sitting there with nothing that you can do about it. That is the danger of the cap space plan, of wiping your books dry and saying this is it. This is your clean slate. Start fresh from here. You have all the roster spots you need. Go do something with it. The downside of that is teams like the Knicks can say we have all of these guys that we can move. We can take Bojan Bogdanović's team option and pick it up and trade him to Brooklyn and with picks to get Mikal Bridges. That is the downside to what we're talking about, to the cap space plan here. But I still think You've spent the last 4 years chasing your tail. A fascinating dynamic in play here is we just watched the Celtics beat the Dallas Mavericks in the finals, right? And the Dallas Mavericks, they lost Jalen Brunson for nothing. They had to trade Dorian Finney-Smith, who was a very, very valuable starter for them, to the Nets to go get Kyrie Irving. So they spent a year and a half chasing their own tail because they let Brunson walk for nothing. The Sixers, on the other hand, have spent the last 4 years trying to chase their tail because of the Tobias Harris contract, because of the Al Horford contract, and because they've traded things to get off some bad money. And some of those trades had not gone well, by the way. The Buddy Hield trade didn't go well. George Hill trade didn't go well. But, they had to get off Al Horford to get more shooting around Joel. They had to, get off. So they had to do some things to make this team work better. So I understand that there are people out there who are very frustrated that they can't be more active for these high level role players, star level wings, i.e. Mikal Bridges, what have you. But the upside is this. I think with this new CBA that's in place, it's designed to lock you into the pieces that you already have, the core that you already have on your roster. The Celtics are locked into Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Derek White, Drew Holiday, and Kristaps Porzingis. Great. That's great. They won a title. Fantastic. I think a year or two down the line, in order to actually build the depth, the roster out behind those guys, you're going to have to start knocking at that core a little bit and slowly trading guys to get multiple players back that you can fill out the rest of your roster with. Same thing with the Knicks. The whole reason the Knicks are able to keep OG Anunoby after trading for Mikal Bridges, there's rumors that they could keep Isaiah Hartenstein after all of this anyway. The reason is because Jalen Brunson signed for below value on his contract. Mikal Bridges is below value on his contract. But eventually you're going to have to give those guys extensions. And that's when we're looking at a scenario where maybe part of those core, part of that core, Josh Hart, Dante DiVincenzo, what have you, you're trading those guys away because you have to build out pieces behind their starters because you can't play them 48 minutes a night, 82 games a season.
Let's quickly, I know now that the pick is official for Adam Bona from UCLA, now a very athletic guy. I would imagine, do you think the writing's on the wall then for Paul Reed? That this guy steps right in the second round pick and is now your backup center?
I don't think it's solidified. I do think it's fascinating that they went center, because Paul obviously did not look great in the playoffs, and I do see like the salary is not guaranteed, and the Sixers are supposed to have some of the most cap space in the NBA this offseason. I do wonder, given Daryl's history, if he sees this as an opportunity to get a second round pick to play a center position. That is not a guaranteed salary slot, by the way. There are exceptions that you use for second round picks, not actual salary slots, and a chance to create an extra $6-7 million that you could use in free agency. I wouldn't pencil it in because I think center and point guard are the hardest positions for rookies to learn in the NBA, and it would be a risk to have an completely inexperienced big man behind Joel as the primary backup. But I do wonder if this opens the door for them to consider creating an additional bit of flexibility.
Right now, okay, we talked about Paul George. I don't know that there's another free agent that's out there that's been linked or that seems to have some buzz. Is the most likely scenario then that the Sixers go down that road of overpaying some balloon payments, 1 year, 1+1 deals, and going back down the road of clearing cap space out again next year?
I personally do not think that you can pitch to Joel, pitch to Ty. Forget the fan base for a second here and telling them to kick it down the road another year. You tell Joel, we kind of basically mailed in last season a little bit. With the moves that we made. Tyrese did you a favor and said, I will delay signing my extension until next offseason. That was a risk for him to take. Took a risk to help you out. To come up empty would be kind of a slap in the face to him. And I don't know that Rich Paul is somebody that you want to unsettle in terms of, being well, my client did this and you didn't even pay back the favor by making this team that much better. So I don't think, I wouldn't rule it out, them just saying we don't want to give these bad contracts out, let's just kick it down the road. But I do think there are pieces that number one, you flat out have to fill out a roster. Right now you have 5, technically 6 players on your roster. You need to get to 12, right? Or 14. Yeah. So, you flat out have to, whether it's re-signing guys or adding new guys, you do have to do that. I would keep an eye out on Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. I think that is someone that there is mutual interest in. His agent is Rich Paul. Tyrese Maxey's agent is Rich Paul. Nick Nurse's agent, I believe, is Clutch Sports as well. So a lot of ties to Philadelphia there. Wouldn't surprise me if that is something that comes to fruition. Maybe it's a balloon payment over 2 years, whatever. But that wouldn't surprise me. I would also keep an eye out on Brandon Ingram. My understanding is he doesn't have a lot of value around the league. I know people don't love Brandon Ingram. He's not the highest on my board either, but he would be a different flavor of, wing type player. He is someone who is due for a contract. He is unlike Paul George and unlike Jimmy Butler, unlike LeBron James, who are all in their mid 30s, 40s. You are not under an obligation to pay him a big deal immediately. You can see how this plays out, roll the dice and say, you know what? We didn't like this experience. Let's not commit to him. You could say, hey, Brandon, we know you want that next contract. You want that new deal? We need you to tweak some things about your game and become more of a 3-point shooter on this team. So I would keep an eye out for that because I think it's possible. But I don't think that you can just mail in this summer and be like, well, we're just going to go run this same group back with a couple of.
Morey said last night, hey, we want to be the best team in the East. Of course you do. But what's the gap now between them in New York and them in Boston?
I think New York looks scary this year in the short term. I think Boston is Boston, obviously. I do think that like the goal is not only this year, but it's the years going forward. And I do think that there are scenarios where the Knicks and the Celtics, where their owners are like, yeah, we're not trying to build such restrictive, like we're not trying to operate under these restrictions that we're going to have in place if we sign all these guys and keep all these guys together. So I don't think it's all hope is lost for the Sixers, whether that be, I don't know that it'll be this year, but years beyond. And so that's why I think you still have to keep it going. And because eventually these teams are going, if they want to field rosters and they want to add to what they have, you're going to have to knock down some of what you already have.
I don't know, man. We'll see. Sunday should be interesting.
It sounds like you're defeated a little bit.
Well, I mean, it just, look, and I wasn't a big Paul George guy, but like if you got Paul George, I think you're better than you were a year ago, right? You're better there, and then you start filling in the pieces around there. It doesn't look like George is going to come here, and if it's not Paul George, what direction do you go? And I think all these avenues, it almost feels like it's going to have to be something that we're not hearing about.
Could be. I mean, who knows? A lot of these, it's not always that these stars put up these massive, big public showing trade requests. A lot of these things happen covertly. The Mikal Bridges thing happened covertly. The Kevin Durant thing happened covertly. A lot of times the things that you don't hear about that suddenly it happens. Who knows? I would say that just because Daryl Morey wants or talks about this 3-star model does not mean that it's the avenue that they go down. The Knicks, as great as they look after the Bridges trade, we still have to keep in mind there are 2 guys on that team that have made All-Stars. That's Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle. None of the guys who were the big playoff contributors last year have been All-Stars. Mikal Bridges has never been an All-Star. So there are ways that you can do like high-level role player scenarios and build out a team that looks similar to the Knicks. And then at that point, maybe the difference is like, is Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey better than Jalen Brunson? So I would just say, see how it plays out, but to just call it time of death in June makes very little sense to me.
I agree with that. I'm waiting. I'm trying to see what happens here. And we've had a lot of discussion about Morey and the job he's done. I think he was put into a tough situation. He's kind of untangled the web. You got yourself to this point, and it's like, hey, you did a good job getting here. Not a great job, just a good job. Like, hey, now you're back. Unfortunately, you're back at a spot with cap space and some draft choices in a year where having cap space and draft choices doesn't seem to be very advantageous.
Yeah, I'll say this about Daryl. Like, people don't like Daryl because for whatever reason, maybe it's that he was very publicly like supporting Tobias Harris last offseason, and people took that as condescending, like the crumble cookie thing. And they're like, well, how about now, Daryl? Like, the guy was terrible for you in the playoffs and whatnot. His interests outside of basketball, I think, can sometimes rub people the wrong way, even though I think we all have interests outside of our jobs. So to judge a guy on that is just weird to me. When he took this job, he inherited a roster that had just gotten swept out of the first round. Every move that they made the previous offseason went up in flames. And he was tasked with overseeing that turnaround and then leading the team from there. So he spent the first 4 years of his tenure untangling the mess, living with the constraints placed upon him with the Tobias Harris contract. Could have said, well, we could have gotten rid of Tobias Harris earlier. It could have been the team that said, we'll take him. We need 3 first-round picks for it. And it's like, well, I'm not going to trade 3 first-round picks for that because I don't want to jeopardize things down the line. And so you live with Tobias Harris. Not every deal has worked out for sure. People, I think, look at James Harden and they don't like James Harden, the person. They don't like his style of play, and they let that allow that to mean that the James Harden trade was a failure. They traded Andre Drummond, who is a backup center. They traded Seth Curry, who barely has played basketball since that trade. They traded Ben Simmons, who has barely played basketball since that trade. They traded, I think it was 2 first-round picks in that deal to get James Harden, who put together the best regular season of point guard play you could argue in Sixers history. So to say that James Harden deal was a failure, I think is insane. He hasn't been perfect, but I do think that this was never going to be the 4 years leading up to this point were never going to be perfect. It was going to be a difficult time to get here. And now he's on the clock because he has the cap space. He has the ability to use draft picks. And now is the time to see, okay, you have your coach in place that you wanted. Another thing that we have to include here is that Doc Rivers was hired before he was. So there was an element of, I can't just fire the guy immediately or a year down the line or 2 years down the line because he wasn't my choice of coach. I have to wait this out and get on the other side of this contract.
Hey, I'm with you. I like Morey. I think he's done a solid job, but he hasn't been offered the ability to do something really special. He's got himself in a position to do so, and now it'll be interesting to see if that happens. We'll see starting Sunday. Austin will be with us in studio on Monday, and we'll hash it all out and see what happens. We'll have a good old conversation and see if the Sixers give us more to talk about.
I'm gonna have my AirPods in, my microphone in, my computer in one hand, typing out everything as it all comes out. It's gonna be great.
All right, man. Appreciate it. At NBA Krell, check out his piece right now over at 973ESPN.com. Thanks, man.
See you, Mike.
All right, Austin Krell, and he will be in studio Monday for the full hour. We'll do the whole recap of what happens. The NBA free agency opens, and you can hear it all right here on 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app, and, of course, streaming live video on the X platform at 97.3 ESPN. Austin will be in studio Monday here on the Sports Bash. All right, a lot of news today. The Sixers made the draft choice. We ran a little long with Austin there, but the Sixers made the pick in the middle of that. So we got that, a center, which, the people are seemingly like the pick in terms of the backup center. Some people think that this is going to be the best backup center that the Sixers have had. Our boy Jeff Nadeau, who was on yesterday, says really like the selection of Adam Bona for the Sixers. Big, strong, ferocious, big, with good footwork around the rim, efficient and good passer. They need a backup. So, yes, this looks like a guy who will take the place of Paul Reed potentially. And now you can use Paul Reed for something, maybe in a trade. More Sports Bash coming up. The Big Three is coming up next.
It's this.
At Zaxby's, we don't just make chicken fingers. We make the most premium tenderloin, 12-hour marinated, hand-breaded, fried to golden perfection. Deserves not 1, not 2, not even 3, but your choice of 12 dipping sauces chicken fingers. Chicken fingers that you can dip, dunk, or drizzle in ranch, and Zax sauce, and spicy Zax sauce, and honey mustard, and tongue torch, and barbecue. And I'm out of time. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
Mike Gill.
Do I have everybody's attention now?
On 97.3 ESPN and the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app.
Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app. I'm Mike Gill. Thanks to Austin Krell. He'll be in studio on Monday. The Sixers have taken Adam Bona from UCLA with the 41st pick. Some good reviews coming on him. I don't recall watching a lot of UCLA this year, so I can't really sit here and say that. But just from Nadeau, who did not like the McCain pick, he did like the Bona pick. That guy watches everything, so I know he's definitely seen him. He has been getting some pretty good reviews in terms of what he brings to the table. Some people, I think, are suggesting that he will be the backup center right off the bat, that he would be ready to kind of take that role. Defensive guy, high motor, high energy, all that stuff. Zach Lowe mentioning Jeremy Grant and Brandon Ingram as a target for Philadelphia. He says, quote, people have whispered Brandon Ingram. People have whispered Jeremy Grant. Neither of those are as exciting to me as Paul George. I don't know if you got Brandon Ingram and Jeremy Grant. That's two really long wing players.
If you told me, Mike, that I went in the next year with both Grant and Ingram and Embiid and Maxey, I'd be happy, honestly, because of the fact that I think both Ingram and Grant have more value than just Paul George. I think it's very simple. I think that you know who the star is on the team, right? It's Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. And now you're saying we got Grant and Ingram. You got length. You got some shooting. You got some younger guys. I mean, people forget Paul George is going to turn 35. So I would be happy with that. I'd be thrilled.
Yeah, like I said with Austin, he said, I sound, like I'm not. I'm just like, at this point, I'm just waiting and seeing. I'm not trying to guess. I'm not trying to figure anything out. I'm just like, all right, I give Morey a chance to do something here now. Let's see what you do. You got kind of as Austin kind of chronicled. He got handled a tangled mess. He untangled the mess. And now it's like, hey, I cleaned my room. Can I keep it clean? Or is it going to get messy again? Mm-hmm. So let's see what he ends up doing here.
Well, Mike, let's recap a couple of the stories that are not NBA related throughout the day. I first want to start with those who didn't hear the news earlier. As expected, Spencer Turnbull has been put on the Phillies injured list. So right now it looks like it'll be Michael Mercado who will start on July 2nd versus the Chicago Cubs. I want to let you know, Michael Mercado, in the minor leagues this year, he had 10 of his 14 games per start, 1.71 ERA, only 44 strikeouts and 47 in the third inning. So he's not a high strikeout guy. But, Mike, you always look at the whip. 1.14. So what are your thoughts on Turnbull going on the injured list and then Mercado projected to start?
Listen, it's the fifth spot on a team that is 4 deep, and you just really need to kind of, hope that the guy doesn't completely implode. I'm intrigued by Mercado. I wrote an article about him back in February. There was an article that picked one player from each team that could be a surprise. He was the pick from the Phillies. He's got a live arm. He's a guy from Tampa. So sometimes, you get those Tampa guys and they end up working out for you. That being said, I don't think this is a long-term thing because Taijuan Walker should be back, and Taijuan Walker will be the guy when he's back ready to take that position.
Yeah, the working assumption, if everything lines up the way it looks right now, is that theoretically Taijuan Walker could be back not this weekend, but for next weekend, if it all plays out correctly and he's doing okay. So the theory was that Mercado would basically start one game in theory during the Chicago series, and that then the next time that spot comes around would be July 7th. And then maybe Walker comes back by then, maybe he doesn't. But you mentioned earlier, Mike, and I want to ask you, what is the better idea? Is it pushing the pitching staff back to avoid an extra stop for Mercado, or do you keep everyone on schedule as is?
I would imagine, if you know that Walker's coming back, because I think he's allowed to come back on the 7th, right?
Yes.
So I would think that...
And that would be the Sunday game in Atlanta.
Yeah, but I would think you want to see Mercado, see what you got with him. So I think he'll pitch once and then see what happens there, and then you'll probably see Walker if he's ready to come back there. And, look, this is, the bigger story for me is Turnbull being out 6 to 8 weeks and how important they felt he was. To me, he's not important. To me, he is the Michael Lorenzen of the staff right now. Lorenzen came over, throws that no-hitter, was exciting, you got him in the trade, and then he had no role come playoff time. A guy that's like that swing man, that long man, come playoff time, they don't really have that big of a role. And I think that's where Spencer Turnbull kind of fits in with what his role would be here. So I don't think it's a huge loss losing him. I don't think it's a big deal on who replaces him. So... I know people were excited about Spencer, mainly because Walker was not very good and Turnbull had pitched well, and it's like, wow, we got this guy Turnbull. Why aren't you using him? Inconsequential in my estimation.
Mike, my second story goes to the NFL. A jury in the U.S. District Court has ruled today that the NFL must pay $4.7 billion in damages as part of a violation of antitrust laws. The jury in the case claims that there is $96 million in damages to just commercial businesses. Now, this is based on, for those who don't understand the full story, basically the NFL Sunday Ticket has been sold for years. And the idea is that bars, restaurants, and people at home get to buy variations of the out-of-market Sunday Ticket package. Well, the dispute has been over the years that the NFL forces you to buy for all the teams and not just for the team you want to watch.
I can't believe they lost this deal, by the way.
Well, they are appealing it. So it does have a chance to go to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals for them to hear. And of course, if they don't get the hearing they want from there, it can go to the Supreme Court. So this is going to be taking a while for any of this to be resolved, but it is a landmark case because of the amount of money that is involved. It should be noted, as Andrew Brandt says, that he thinks it's going to take another couple of years for this to be resolved.
Likely.
So,
but I mean, like, it's a lot of money here, right?
$4.7 billion.
Right. So they basically said that fans should have been able to buy a la carte.
Basically, just the team. There should have been a package just for, like, if you're a Packers fan living in, like, South Carolina or something.
I mean, I don't understand how you're basically telling them how to run their business.
Correct.
You know, like, I could have a restaurant and say, like, you have to order everything a la carte. Because you might say, no, I don't want to buy a baked potato separately. I want it to be part of the meal. And I'd say, that's not the way my restaurant runs.
Right.
This is the opposite. I'm saying you can't buy stuff a la carte. You got to buy the whole meal. So how can they be told, no, you can't do that?
The ruling claims this is an abuse of their antitrust exemption because they're forcing people to pay for something they may not want.
Then don't buy it. I mean, that's
what Andrew Brandt said. Brandt said on his podcast.
Now, listen, I'm for buying it a la carte. I would much rather that, but I also say, like, this is America. Like, the guy they can create the business any way they want.
Right.
I'm stunned by this. I can't believe they lost this deal. Who's getting this money?
So
which no one will ever get, by the way.
Right. No, well, so $96 million of the $4.2 billion is going to commercial businesses who are part of the
bars
and restaurants who are part of the lawsuit. The rest of the
all
money
right.
is going to
So
go
my
to
fellow
the
bar
residents.
owner. Well, I'm not a bar owner. My friends who are bar owners out
Your
there,
fellow Americans.
Let me know when you get that check and how much it's for.
Yeah. What is it?
If you own a bar out there, are you anticipating getting a check on this? Seriously,
I doubt it.
And how much is it? Is this like one of these class action suits where I get like $72?
Right, like everyone's going to get a piece of it. So if it's $96 million, you're dividing it by how many businesses? And then, of course, you got lawyer fees that have to be paid for, right? It's not like you're going to get like a huge chunk of money here.
I just don't like, I don't know. I don't know how they, I don't know how they said that this is like, you can't do this. I don't get it.
It's very strange.
I'm perplexed.
Mike, I want to squeeze in one more topic for you. So we haven't really touched on it as much today, but history was made last night in the NBA draft. For the first time in NBA history, 2 international, non-college attending foreign-born players were drafted back-to-back in the draft. Now, of course, we saw Victor Wembanyama be drafted last year number 1 overall, but this year was the first time 2 straight players of that qualifiers ever been drafted. So is this a trend? Is this something that we're going to see more of in the future? What is your reaction to that?
I mean, yeah, obviously. I mean, this is happening. You said this is the first time that it's been the top 2 players?
The first 2 players in the draft, yes.
I would have to imagine, though, over the last at least 5 years. I mean, Ben Simmons was from Australia. He was the first pick.
But he went to college at LSU.
Oh, so you're saying a non-collegiate player?
Correct.
Gotcha.
Because
so say
back-to-back
an international or foreign-born player has been, Ben Simmons was Australia.
Right. Well, Victor Wembanyama last year, Yao Ming years ago, for example. There's been plenty of players picked number one.
Yeah, but I'm just saying in general,
back-to-back
you go
picks.
back to the, so you're saying someone went to college as opposed to where they're from.
Correct.
Okay, that's a different story.
Well, that's what they say, internationally foreign-born players is the qualifier.
Will this be the trend? Yeah, because our AAU system is pathetically a joke. It's awful. It's ruined college basketball. It's ruining the NBA. The NBA is a joke. Look at this. I mean, they can't. You got all these people doing all this stuff in the AAU ranks, and you got people from overseas now getting drafted 1 and 2. Nobody wants what these guys are getting taught here, which is nothing. It's a joke. The whole system's broken. I don't know how no one can see this, and that yet you're still going down the same road. But good, God bless you. You've ruined you've done a great job at ruining the basketball.
You've ruined everything.
Hierarchy and system. I don't know how, if you're somebody who runs one of these basketball AAU things, you're doing it for money. I mean, you're making money. That's what you're doing it for. Sure. But you can't feel satisfactory about the direction of the game and the way that the, other countries are now passing over the players that are in whatever system is going on right now, which is an atrocity.
Well, for example, there were 3 Frenchmen drafted in the top 10 and 2 overtime elite players dropped in the top 10. So,
overtime elite players are generally high school. They're kids that don't go to college.
They don't go to college,
but they're American-born players.
What I'm saying is that means
that's not a good example.
5 will be. Think about it. 5 of the top 10 are not going to college. They're not going to college in America. The whole system is the opposite of what it used to be.
Well, but those players are American high school players who are just bypassing going to college and going to the G League. Well, that's a new thing. That's different. What we're talking about, like Luka Doncic, he is from Spain. He was the 3rd pick in the draft a couple of years ago. So he was, but around him was DeAndre Ayton, who is just a nice player. Marvin Bagley. Turned out he can't play. Jaren Jackson's been a very good player. Trae Young's been very, very good. Mo Bamba stinks. Wendell Carter's been a disappointment. Colin Sexton's been all right. Kevin Knox was a busteroni. So the best player in that draft is Luka Doncic.
Yeah.
The player who's not from here. I'm trying to think. The next year was Zion
and Ja.
Right. Both have been pretty good players. R.J. Barrett's been good, not great. DeAndre Hunter has not been very good. Darius Garland's been a good player. Jarrett Culver's been with a busteroni.
Yep.
But there wasn't a player that was a non-American born player in that draft that I'm thinking of. The 2020 draft, this is where it gets Anthony Edwards, very good player.
Very good player.
James Wiseman stinks.
Bust.
LaMelo Ball's a nice player.
Ball's a good player. He's been injured a little bit, but he's a good player. Very good player. Can we say he's very good or say he's good?
The draft just stinks anymore. I mean, you just don't get any help. I mean, Killian Hayes stinks. Obi Toppin.
Well, Halliburton was 12th overall and Maxey was 21 that year.
Yeah, but I'm saying from 4 to 12, you got a whole lot of stink.
Right.
Yeah.
The draft is basically roulette at this point. You have no idea what you're getting.
Cade Cunningham has been
okay,
good, not great. Jalen Green's been all right.
Solid? Can we call him a solid player?
Mobley's a nice player.
Although apparently Jalen Green stole Tyrod Taylor's wife, and that's a whole fiasco on the internet right now.
Good for him.
You didn't see that story?
No.
Yeah, Tyrod Taylor kicked his ex-wife out of the house that he was going to give her.
By the way, who's the best player in the 2021 draft?
Ooh, man.
I'll tell you who it is right now. Well, the 2021 draft, the best player, I would think, is a non-American college player. Non-American or non-collegiate player.
Right, non-American, non-collegiate. Yeah.
Is the guy from Houston, Sengun.
Sengun.
He's probably the best player in that draft.
You put him ahead of Evan Mobley? Scotty Barnes just got paid a lot of money.
He got paid a lot of money, but I think Sengun might be the best player in that class.
It's fair.
System's broken. Needs to be started over.
Blow it all up.
Please. Start over. Let's start again. See if we still follow the same mess that we have. Where was the guy from last night? You had Wembanyama went first last year, and this year the guy was from two guys from France.
Well,
right?
I said,
three guys from France. Were
3 guys in the top 10.
In the top 10.
4 in the first round.
Yeah. Canadian guy, a Lithuanian guy, a Serbian guy, a German guy, a Cameroon, a guy from Switzerland, another guy from France. All right. Well, that's it. That's the big 3. We'll do it again tomorrow on a Happy Hour Friday. Bob Wankel, Mike McGarry, Adam Kaplan, and we'll see what happens. Sixers made the pick, number 41. We'll have Keith Smith tomorrow to recap all the draft stuff. It's a Sports Bash. Adam Bona, by the way, is the Sixers pick at 41 out of UCLA. All right, everybody. Have a great night. We'll be back tomorrow with more Sports Bash live on 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app, and, of course, live video streaming on the X platform at 973 ESPN. Use the hashtag SBLive. Game night is up next. I'm Mike Gill, and this is the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN.
At Zaxby's, we don't just make chicken fingers. We make the most premium tenderloin, 12-hour marinated, hand-breaded, fried to golden perfection. Deserves not 1, not 2, not even 3, but your choice of 12 dipping sauces chicken fingers. Chicken fingers that you can dip, dunk, or drizzle in ranch, and Zax sauce, and spicy Zax sauce, and honey mustard, and tongue torch, and barbecue. And I'm out of time. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.